Pokemon Champions is the single biggest thing to ever happen in competitive Pokemon's history. It's like the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, except the dinosaurs in question are Koraidon, Miraidon, and anyone who enjoyed the grueling task of training Pokemon the old way. Making the game accessible to new players all around the world, bringing us a refreshing new format, and bringing back Mega Evolutions after nearly a decade makes this a really special time for Pokemon battling. And so, as you'd expect, the first tournament of Pokemon Champions is going to be unlike anything that we've ever seen before. Pokemon tournaments are always intense, but the first tournament of a new game is uniquely special. There's an unspoken question humming in the air, filling the minds of players and spectators alike. A question that is harder to answer than at any other time in a game's life cycle. Which Pokemon are going to come out on top? If you're newer to competitive Pokemon, this seems like it should be an easy question to answer. The strongest Pokemon should be the ones who ultimately claim victory. But at the start of a new game, nobody knows what the strongest Pokemon actually are. Sometimes Pokemon that end up becoming the best are completely skipped over when a game first releases. And sometimes Pokemon initially thought to be great end up fading from relevancy before our very eyes. And Pokemon Champions presents a bigger opportunity for this than ever before because of the return of Mega Evolutions, which allow you to choose one of your Pokemon and give them a super-powered transformation, often totally warping the way the base Pokemon functions. Mega Evolutions haven't been present in tournament play since 2019. Almost 7 full years ago. And not only are they back, there are tons of new Mega Evolutions that nobody has ever seen before. What this signals, at least to me, is that there's probably some overlooked gems within the Mega Evolutions. Some Pokemon that maybe aren't as immediately, obviously strong, but could give me a real fighting chance at this monumental tournament. A tournament that is extremely important for me, since my entire season is on the line. Earlier this year, I took an extended 4-month break from tournament play, and that means that I've only attended 3 tournaments this year. This is far below the average for the majority of the players hoping to qualify for the Pokemon World Championships. And so, even though my finishes have been quite good, I have not yet qualified for the 2026 Pokemon World Championships. I have qualified for every single World Championships since I began playing in 2011. This year is the 10-year anniversary of when I won the World Championships back in 2016, and it's held in the same city of San Francisco to boot. Indianapolis is the penultimate tournament where I can qualify. 2 weeks afterwards is the North American International Championships, arguably the second most difficult tournament behind the World Championships each year. I would really like to earn my invite in Indianapolis so that it doesn't all come down to my final event. But I have a problem. In order to win a Pokemon tournament, you need Pokemon, and strong ones at that. Choosing your team of 6 Pokemon is effectively round 0 of the tournament, and if you don't choose them well, it can seal your fate before you shake hands with a single opponent. And this is where my problem comes in, because the tournament is in 2 weeks, and I do not have a team. I've been trying to build around Mega Gengar. It's my personal favorite Mega Evolution, and on paper, it seems like it should be exceptionally strong. See, right now there are 2 main Mega Evolutions dominating competitive play, Mega Charizard Y and Mega Floette. These 2 powerhouses output tremendous amounts of special damage that threaten to overwhelm the majority of the available Pokemon in the format. Gengar, in theory, should be good against them. With its poison typing, it threatens Floette, and with its Shadow Tag ability, it can trap Charizard on the field while a partner Pokemon overwrites its weather, removing Charizard's sun and therefore its greatest strength. But no matter what I do, I just can't get Mega Gengar to work. The problem is actually the non-Mega Pokemon. This rule set, called Regulation M-A, is chock full of powerful, physical attacking Pokemon that all seem to threaten Gengar, and aren't especially threatened in return. And there's no obvious solution. 2 weeks until the tournament that could determine my entire season, and I've got nothing. The single biggest problem for Gengar is Kingambit. With its Dark and Steel typing, Gengar really couldn't ask for a worse matchup. While it does have a quadruple weakness to fighting moves, the standard Kingambit set nowadays uses the Chople Berry, cutting the power of super effective fighting moves in half. With this damage reduction and Kingambit's high defense stat, almost no physical attackers are capable of KOing it in one hit. But Kingambit has a far more manageable special defense stat. This doesn't really help in terms of fighting moves because there's almost no special attacking fighting types, but maybe there's a good ground type user. So I go to the Pokedex and I see if there are any strong Pokemon that can learn the best ground type special attacking move, Earth Power. And it is here, staring back at me, that I see a Pokemon ignored by the field, ignored by the fans, scorned by the Pokemon Company itself. A Mega Evolution with no usage, no accomplishments, no glory. A Pokemon that, by all accounts, has been forgotten to the sands of time. But this is a Pokemon that I have history with, that I once believed in so much that I brought it to a tournament 8 years ago. With my season on the line, the first member of my team for the first tournament of Pokemon Champions is Mega Steelix. I know that I have questions that need to be answered, like, what are you thinking? And has anyone seen the nurse? He's gotten out again. And I promise I will do my best to answer them and convince you that Steelix isn't just some meme pick, but a Pokemon that I really believe in. But first, I want to tell you about why Steelix is not only at the core of this team, but at the core of my entire competitive Pokemon career. Everyone's Pokemon journey begins with their first Pokemon. For many of the millions of people who have fallen in love with this magical franchise, that's a starter Pokemon. A Pokemon pre-selected by the company to maximize your odds of falling in love with it. But for me, the Pokemon that started my journey and ended up completely altering the path that my life took was Onix. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I hated getting my hair cut. Well, I still don't particularly like it right now, but I've learned how to sit still over the past 25 years. This was not so much the case when I was a wolfling. And so my mom would take me to this hair cuttery for children, where they'd put cartoons on a screen in front of you so you would sit still long enough for them to trim whatever unruly nest had taken perch atop your little dome. On one of these memorable visits, the cartoon playing was an episode of the Pokemon anime, a cartoon that my mom had never allowed me to watch, thinking that it was too violent. The specific episode playing is one where Ash and the gang are trapped on a sinking ship and they need to escape. At one point, Brock tells his Onix to build a staircase for our heroes to climb, and my mom found this scene so charming that, going forward, Pokemon was removed from our household's list of contraband. I unsurprisingly fell in love with the franchise, so much so that I would enter a local regional championship 10 years later, winning the entire thing and kickstarting my competitive Pokemon journey. But no matter how many Pokemon I've met over the years, Onix has always held a special place in my heart for being the Pokemon that started it all. Now, you would think that this is where my journey with Onix ends, but it isn't. Because in 2014, Onix's evolution, Steelix, received a Mega Evolution. Mega Steelix is a good Mega Evolution in some senses of the word. It has a great design, and the 100 base stats it gets upon Mega Evolving are distributed very efficiently. However, Steelix's base form was considered to be such a bad Pokemon that Mega Steelix does not have a single recorded result in its debut generation. But 4 years later, in 2018, I brought Mega Steelix to the Dallas Regional Championships. In a format filled with powerful fairy and electric types, I bet it all on this ground and steel type snake.
Look at this team! What does it do versus Steelix?
And I didn't do too badly, finishing in the top 16. Despite the good finish, it left me feeling unsatisfied, because in building this Mega Steelix team and taking it to the tournament, I felt the Pokemon was so much better than it was getting credit for. I felt like I still had more to prove. But Mega Evolutions were removed from the game the following year in Sword and Shield, and I never got the chance to show the world they'd been wrong about this Pokemon. That is, until now. And so, with the evolution of Pokemon battling with the advent of Pokemon Champions, I'm betting my future on the evolution of the Pokemon that started my own Pokemon journey, Mega Steelix. We're gonna get back to talking about Steelix in a second, but first I had an update that I wanted to give you all. I've been competing in Pokemon tournaments for over 15 years, and for the vast majority of that time, one of the most important tools that I've used is a notebook for note-taking. I developed a specialized layout that I've used over the years to help me take the best notes I can, but I was getting frustrated having to draw a new layout every single time for every single match. And so I made this, the Difference Notebook. This is a specialized notebook for competitive Pokemon, with each page having the layout that I developed. I've been using this notebook in tournaments since we started prototyping it, and I'm personally very happy. Anyway, like I said a couple months ago, we made this public and we did a limited time launch. I think we ran for like 3 weeks. It's been really exciting to see people using the notebook and yeah, just overall saying how helpful it's been. It's really special for me. But we also received some feedback about things that people wanted that the notebook didn't offer. One of the biggest things is that this thing is big, okay? Like I have a relatively large head, and this is on purpose. I wanted a big notebook because like I want room to take notes. amounts. Another point of feedback was the price. Just to be totally transparent, we're not making a ton of profit on each of these notebooks that we sold. For me, the priority here was not to treat this as a cash grab, but to like actually get a tool into the hands of people that would help them and help them get better at competitive Pokemon. And so rather than adding extra margin on top, which would have just been our profit, we like kept the price as low as we reasonably could. And part of the reason why this notebook was like pretty expensive to produce is because the materials are actually quite nice. Like this is a hefty, solid, high quality notebook, and the company that we worked with is a company that is quite reputable as well. And so the cost to produce it were kind of steep, and that was reflected in the final price. So we had these two main points of feedback, which is one, it's big, and two, we want it to be cheaper. And so we made this. This is the Difference Notebook Trainer Edition. The original one is the Champion Edition. And look, I can hold it in one hand. When I hold this one in one hand, it's harder. Anyway, the Trainer Edition of the Difference Notebook is, as you can see, a good bit smaller and more portable. The material we chose for the cover is more economical, and that allows us to keep the price lower. The page layout is the same, although it's on smaller paper because the notebook itself is smaller, but the functionality is identical. And the most exciting thing about this notebook is because it's more economical to make, our hope is to be able to keep it up for longer, maybe indefinitely. If you're interested in getting the Trainer Edition of the Difference Notebook, go to vgcnotebook.com. If you're interested in the original Champion version of the Difference Notebook, there's a mailing list that you can sign up for, so you'll be notified when we bring it back. Anyway, with all that being said, let's talk about Steelix. I think that Steelix can shine right now because of two main factors: its typing and its stats. Its grounded steel typing is a huge boon into Mega Floette, one of the most powerful and popular Mega Evolutions available. Resisting its Fairy type moves and being able to deal big damage back is something that very few Pokemon are capable of, especially given that neither of the two best Steel type Pokemon or the best Poison type Pokemon in the format actually resist Fairy. Ground as a secondary type is valuable too. It complements Steel offensively since Steel can't hit Electric, Fire, and Steel type Pokemon, all of which Ground hits for super effective damage. And then there's the stats. So, slight tangent, have you all heard of Mega Aggron? I swear this Pokemon has the best PR team out of any of the Mega Evolutions. They call it the Wall. It drives home the point that Mega Aggron is this immovable bastion of defense. This Pokemon that you will never get off the field no matter how hard you try. This nickname comes primarily from Mega Aggron's base defense stats, tied for the highest defense in the entire game. But the Pokemon that it's tied with is Mega Steelix, who gets no love at all. And maybe you're thinking that the reason why is because Mega Aggron's other stats are all better than Mega Steelix's. And based on the way that people talk about these two Pokemon, that is a very reasonable assumption to make. So let's actually take a look. HP, Steelix has 5 more points. Special defense, Steelix has 15 more points? Steelix is bulkier than Mega Aggron? The Pokemon whose whole thing is being unbreakable? Mega Aggron is faster, although here that's actually a bad thing. It's also stronger, although that's actually not true for a couple of reasons, but if you just look at the stats, it does appear to be stronger. Lastly, Mega Aggron and Mega Steelix have different abilities. While Mega Aggron has Filter, reducing incoming damage from super effective hits, Steelix has Sand Force. Sand Force is, in my opinion, one of the single most underrated abilities, period. It's underrated because most of the Pokemon that get it have strictly better abilities or are considered not worth using in the first place. Mega Steelix is the exception. Sand Force gives all of the user's Rock, Ground, and Steel type moves a flat 30% power boost when the Sand weather condition is active. 30% is a tremendous boost in the context of competitive Pokemon. So much so that when it's in the game, the item Life Orb is always one of the most popular, and it costs the user 10% of their maximum health whenever they hit something to get the same boost. This is part of the reason why I said that Mega Aggron having a higher attack stat doesn't necessarily mean that it's stronger than Mega Steelix. When factoring in Sand Force, Steelix comes out on top. Of course, it is true that Sand Force requires sand to be up, and that it only works on certain types of moves. This would be a major drawback, except that Steelix doesn't need any other types of moves. Let's talk about the format. Regulation M-A. This is a weird format for a few reasons. The pool of Pokemon is smaller than what we had access to for the majority of Scarlet and Violet, and there is a far more limited item pool than we've ever had before. With limited items in roster, it's created a rather centralized set of Pokemon dominating the game. And this winner circle of the top has a few glaring weaknesses. Ignoring the Mega Evolutions, all 5 of the most used Pokemon are physical attackers. 3 of those 5 are weak to ground moves. None of them resist ground moves. Looking further outside of the top 5, only 2 Pokemon in the top 20 can resist both ground and steel type moves. those being Pelipper and Rotom Wash. But of these, only Rotom Wash is a true resistance, because we need to talk about the other reason why Steelix ends up being stronger than Mega Aggron. Steelix is Big Boy, and what I mean by that is that Steelix is the second heaviest Pokemon in the game right now, only behind Mudsdale, who is almost never used. Steelix being so heavy is a tremendous blessing, because Steelix's best attack is a move called Heavy Slam. Heavy Slam has variable base power, and becomes stronger the heavier the user is compared to the target. If Steelix weighs more than 5 times the target's weight, Heavy Slam reaches a massive base power of 120, the equivalent of a move like Close Combat without a downside. And thankfully, Steelix is 740 kilograms, maxing out Heavy Slam's power against most things. That's 740 bags of sugar, 4 to 5 motorcycles, or about 2 large grand pianos. You've seen what happens when a grand piano falls on a cartoon character. Now imagine 2 falling on a Sylveon. Mega Aggron by contrast is nowhere near as heavy. For example, against a bulky Mega Floette, who is arguably the most important Pokemon for a Steel type to fight, Mega Aggron cannot pick up a one-hit KO with Heavy Slam, as the base power of the move is only 80 because Aggron is not Big Boy. Not only does Steelix get this KO without breaking a sweat, but it can even do it after an Intimidate if Sand Force is active. Heavy Slam is so strong that even Pokemon like Pelipper, who are immune to ground moves and resist steel moves, cannot feel too safe. In the sand, Heavy Slam will KO Pelipper in just 2 hits. And Heavy Slam isn't Steelix's only strong move. When I used Steelix last time in 2018, its best ground type attack was Earthquake. It is a good move, but because it also damages your partner Pokemon, it was quite difficult to use. Now though, Steelix gets a new weapon. High Horsepower. Is Steelix a horse? Game Freak seems to think so, and who might argue with Big Pikachu? High Horsepower only hits one of your opponent's Pokemon, but it hits hard. With 95 base power, it ends up being 20 points stronger than Earthquake. This is because moves that hit multiple targets have a damage reduction to 75% of their original power. Of course, High Horsepower is also boosted by Sand Force. To give you an idea of just how strong this move is, as long as sand is up, High Horsepower actually has a small chance to KO Basculegion, factoring in 1 turn of sand damage. It might seem improbable that Steelix could survive long enough to attack here, given that Basculegion is the single strongest water type attacker in the game right now, has access to a ridiculously strong water move, has an ability that makes its water moves even stronger, and is super effective against Steelix. But even factoring all these multipliers in, and giving Basculegion an item to boost its water moves even further, Steelix will still survive a Wave Crash. That's how bulky it is. Steelix needs to run Protect to keep itself safe, and block all incoming damage for 1 turn. Given its low speed stat, it's kind of irreplaceable here. That just leaves the question of the last move. Almost everybody expects Steelix to have the move Body Press. This 80 base power fighting move uses the user's defense stat to calculate damage instead of its attack stat. Not only does this help provide some insurance against Intimidate, lowering Steelix's attack, but even by investing the maximum possible training into Steelix attack and not putting a single point into its defense, Mega Steelix has over 60 points more defense than attack. But I'm not going to use Body Press because I think it's a bait. As we've already established, Steelix already hits nearly every Pokemon in the format for good damage with just the 2 moves that it already has. Moreover, most of the Pokemon that Steelix has trouble hitting are flying types, and flying resists the fighting type Body Press. And so, instead of going with a damaging move, I'm instead choosing to give Steelix a little bit more support with the move Wide Guard. Wide Guard blocks all moves that hit multiple targets, and it goes first despite Steelix's low speed stat. It has tons of uses right now. For example, it can block Rock Slide, the move many players treat as a panic button due to its high flinch chance. Against a Garchomp whose only ground move is Earthquake, it can fully lock them out of damaging Steelix. It can block Hyper Voice and Dazzling Gleam, aiming to wear down Steelix's partners. It can fully shut down Sinistcha, whose only damaging move is Matcha Gotcha, which is a spread move. But my favorite use case has to be against the Sun Pokemon. For example, Mega Charizard. Mega Charizard and Torkoal often run the same moves: Protect, Weather Ball, Heat Wave, and Solar Beam. This moveset makes sense. It gives you strong single target fire type burst damage and grass coverage for the rock and water types who resist fire. However, 2 of these moves are dependent on the sun being active. Weather Ball changes type to match the weather, and Solar Beam can only be used in a single turn while sun is active. Imagine you were to overwrite the sun. Let's say turn it to sand. Well, now Weather Ball would be a rock type move not boosted by the weather or by Charizard's typing. Solar Beam would take 2 turns to use, and in sand its power is halved. And that just leaves Heat Wave, which is blocked by Wide Guard. In other words, against the most used Mega Evolution in the game, Steelix is capable of shutting it out once you take control of the weather. Mega Steelix has a lot going for it, but Base Steelix has some use as well thanks to its Sturdy ability. This ability prevents it from being knocked out in one hit, keeping it alive with 1 HP. With Wide Guard and Sturdy, there are times where it can be advantageous to keep Steelix in its base form. I hunted for a shiny Alpha Steelix. I actually caught over 90 shinies before getting it because I didn't know about donut hunting, and so I wasn't doing it very efficiently. This gives my Steelix the title, the Former Alpha, and ensures that it is as big as possible. I nicknamed Steelix Goose, as I'm hoping it'll be the golden goose that gets me my World's Invite. The nice thing about starting with Mega Steelix is that I have a clear direction for the second Pokemon on my team. In order to activate Steelix's full potential, I need to activate the Sand. The best Pokemon to do that is none other than Tyranitar. Tyranitar really needs no introduction. It's one of the best Pokemon of all time. There's a few reasons for this, and none of them include its terrible Dark and Rock typing, but I would argue that out of all the things that make Tyranitar great, none is more integral than its ability, Sand Stream. Whenever you send Tyranitar out, it sets up the Sand weather condition. Sand damages all Pokemon at the end of every turn for 6% of their maximum health, unless they are a Rock, Ground, or Steel type. It also enables certain abilities, such as Sand Force. But more important even than bringing out the full power of our silly Steel Snake is the fact that Sand overwrites other weather. While Sun and Rain use their weather offensively, powering up Fire and Water type moves, Sand is mostly used defensively, and that is especially relevant right now. That's because almost all of the strong weather setters run the move Weather Ball, a move I mentioned earlier that gets stronger in weather while changing its type to match it. In the Sand, Weather Ball becomes a Rock type move, a terrible choice against both Tyranitar and Steelix. So Tyranitar is strong not only because it enables Steelix, but also because it serves as a defensive wedge against the powerful weather-based strategies of the format. That's all well and good, but it doesn't answer one crucial question: how am I actually supposed to use this thing? Tyranitar has incredibly well-rounded stats, but that's actually a bit of a problem here, as it means the best set for Tyranitar is not so obvious. The first and most important question is the item, and there's 3 main options: a defensive item like the Focus Sash or Choppleberry, an offensive item like the Choice Scarf or the White Herb, and the Mega Stone. At first glance, the Mega Stone seems like the easiest option to rule out. After all, we want Tyranitar to enable Mega Steelix, and since we can only Mega 1 Pokemon per match, that means that every time we Mega Steelix, we give up our item on Tyranitar. But we aren't going to want to Mega Evolve Steelix in every matchup, and there's no place that's more obvious than against the extremely popular Sun teams featuring Mega Charizard Y. While Steelix can certainly be brought to this matchup, it can become a liability if Charizard gets out of control, especially if the Sun is active. And this matchup is the biggest reason to use Mega Tyranitar. See, weather wars become a bit complicated when you factor in Mega Evolutions. Normally, the weather on the field is whichever was set up by the Pokemon that switched in most recently. However, when a Pokemon like Charizard Mega Evolves, its new ability sets the weather up. Because switches happen before Mega Evolution, I won't be able to switch my Tyranitar in on the turn that Charizard Mega Evolves, or else I'll lose control of the weather. I need to wait for Charizard to set the sun and then switch Tyranitar in, and smart players can abuse this by delaying their Mega on Charizard. However, this dynamic flips if Tyranitar is also capable of Mega Evolution. If Charizard and Tyranitar Mega Evolve in the same turn, Charizard will Mega Evolve first, setting the sun. But before it can take advantage of it, Tyranitar will Mega Evolve, changing the weather back to sand, preventing Charizard from firing off solar beams or weather balls in the way that it wants to. Given that Charizard is the single most popular Mega Evolution, and given that I won't bring Steelix against every team, I'm choosing to use the Mega Stone on Tyranitar. Dual Mega teams are quite strong right now, and knowing which two I'm using right from the get-go will make it easier to figure out the rest of my squad. But I'm not ready to do that yet because I still need to figure out what moves to give my Tyranitar. The standard set right now is 3 attacking moves and Protect, but I'm just not convinced by this. See, even though in recent years I've been playing more with Sun and Rain, the truth is that when I first started playing Pokemon competitively, my weather of choice was Sand. In my second year competing, I placed second at a regional and then won US Nationals with the same Tyranitar set. I'd go on to use versions of this Tyranitar many times over the years, winning another regional with it in 2018. And now, I think it's time to bring it to champions. The key move that separates my Tyranitar from the others is none other than Dragon Dance. This move raises Tyranitar's attack and speed by 1 stage. It doesn't sound flashy, but it's incredibly dangerous. Thanks to Tyranitar's natural bulk, it is often able to get a Dragon Dance up without too much fear. And after being boosted, it is a total menace. Rock Slide hits both foes and has a whopping 30% chance to flinch anything that it hits, preventing them from moving. Knockoff not only does amazing single target burst damage, but it also removes the item of anything that it hits. And if you thought these moves were scary from regular Tyranitar, just wait until it Mega Evolves, becoming faster, stronger, and bulkier. The real magic behind this Tyranitar set is that it functions just fine without using its item. While it is nice to Mega Evolve and boost your stats and reset the weather, after a Dragon Dance, base Tyranitar is scary enough as is. This means that I can bring both Tyranitar and Steelix to the same battle without fear that only one can Mega Evolve. And if I end up in a position where Tyranitar is boosted and will win the game if it Mega Evolves, I always have the option of pivoting Steelix into a wide guard supporting Pokemon. The last thing to explain about Tyranitar is its nickname, Birthday Boy 2. This seems like a stupid, silly name, but it's actually based on a tragedy. It begins at the start of Scarlet and Violet, with my good friend, Dr. Aaron Traylor. Aaron had recently learned that Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet have visible size differences, and that if you catch the smallest possible version of a Pokemon, it will get the title the Teeny. Aaron thought that this was hilarious, and so he went on a long and grueling hunt for a teeny tiny Baxcalibur for one of his early tournament teams. Information on how to actually hunt for tiny Pokemon was hard to come by, and the little baby Frigibax were so small, it was hard to find them. Aaron persevered and caught the tiniest Baxcalibur possible, which he named Birthday Boy, after this viral tweet where the subject begs to not get beat up because he's just a little birthday boy. After bringing Baxcalibur to his tournament, a friend asked Aaron if they could borrow Birthday Boy for a tournament they were attending next weekend. Aaron agreed, but he was only half paying attention when he booted up his game and entered the trade menu, and he forgot to set a link code. Before he realized it, Birthday Boy was gone, traded into the abyss, never to be seen again. My Tyranitar is Birthday Boy 2. He's the tiniest possible Tyranitar, and let me tell you, he was a huge pain to get. But he's here and he's on a mission to find his brother, the original Birthday Boy. Hopefully, we'll see him again one day. One thing to note, because my Steelix is the former Alpha, it is the largest size possible by default. With Tyranitar being the smallest size possible, this is what they look like next to each other on the field. I spent the majority of my time with these two in battle being totally unable to see my opponent's Pokemon and cracking myself up. There are lots of reasons why Tyranitar and Steelix complement each other well, but there's one glaring weakness in putting them on the same team: their typings. Both Tyranitar and Steelix are weak to all of Fighting Ground and Water, 3 of the most common types in the format. And that's why the third Pokemon on this team is able to handle all of them. It was always clear to me that this team was going to need a Trick Room setter. That's because Steelix is incredibly slow, and Trick Room turns this from a curse to a blessing. It's the reason why I said that Mega Aggron being faster than Steelix worked against it. But if that's not your cup of tea, Sinistcha can do much more than just twist the dimensions. As a grass and ghost type, it resists ground and water moves and is fully immune to fighting moves, making it an excellent partner for my 2 sandy guys. Arguably more important though is its signature ability, Hospitality. Hospitality heals Sinistcha's partner for 1/4 of their maximum health every single time Sinistcha switches in. Renewable healing for your partner who doesn't need to give up an item or a move slot to get it is frankly absurd in general, but it's even more dangerous with the 2 Pokemon that I already have. Tyranitar wants to Dragon Dance, but whenever it dances, it isn't doing damage, and that means it is liable to take damage. Sinistcha can help Tyranitar shrug off any damage it takes, letting me get boosted for a much less steep cost. Steelix benefits from Hospitality in another way. It is true that Steelix is weak to many of the common Pokemon in the format, but it's also true that these moves often don't do much more than 50%. Garchomp Earthquake and Kingambit Low Kick both can't even do half of Steelix's health, for example. And what that means is that after 2 Hospitalities, my Heavy Hydra can healthily high horsepower hostiles and hurry them to a hospital. Unless you have a specific threat like Mega Charizard Y, the way that you beat Steelix is by chipping it down over time, getting it lower and lower until you can eventually finish it off. That is made much, much more difficult when Sinistra is switching in and out, healing Steelix and twisting the dimensions. Don't forget, Steelix's damage output is absurd, and the sand will deal good damage to opponents over time as well. It might feel like a war of attrition for your opponent, but Steelix certainly doesn't need much time to ramp up. As if all this weren't enough, Sinistra has 2 more moves that are exceptional here. The first is its signature move, Matcha Gotcha. This grass type move hits both opponents, and while it has a small chance to miss and also isn't that strong, it has not 1 but 2 powerful secondary effects. The first is that it heals Sinistra for half of the damage that it deals, allowing the little matcha demon to keep itself healthy. The second is that this move has a whopping 20% chance to burn. Remember that burn cuts the physical attack stat of Pokemon in half. If you burn Garchomp or Sneasler or Kingambit or Basculegion, not only will they have trouble getting through Sinistra, they'll be unable to do nearly any damage to Steelix. After a burn, a single Hospitality will nullify Garchomp's Earthquake. Garchomp's Earthquake! Burns will also make it easier for Tyranitar to boost and stack up quickly when combined with the Sandstorm, wearing down foes rapidly. Sinistra's last move is less flashy, but not less important. Rage Powder forces both opponents' Pokemon to target the user rather than the partner. This can be used to allow Steelix to attack or to let Tyranitar set up for free. Rage Powder really drives home how well these Pokemon's types complement each other. Sneasler, who would love to close combat Tyranitar for a one-hit KO, can't do any damage with close combat into Rage Powder Sinistra. Basculegion and Kingambit have Wave Crash and Low Kick redirected, and if they try and KO Sinistra with a Ghost or Dark move, I can always protect Sinistra while Tyranitar attacks, buying myself a free turn. Sinistra is trained entirely in its bulk, making it very hard to get rid of. It's even harder when you factor in Matcha Gotcha's healing and burn chance, and even more so when you consider the item, the Citrus Berry. This will heal Sinistra for 25% of its maximum health whenever it drops below 50%. If you thought getting rid of this thing was hard before, let me tell you, it is way worse with a quarter more HP to get through. I nicknamed my Sinistra Morning Brew, a pun that I am quite proud of. And now, with half the team complete, I get stuck. No, that's actually not strong enough language. I get completely blown off path. I know that these 3 Pokemon work well together, but I cannot, for the life of me, figure out how to finish the team. I try Pokemon after Pokemon and nothing feels good, and it gets to a point where I'm just about ready to throw in the towel. Part of the problem is that I've convinced myself that the 4th Pokemon on this team is Kommo-o. It's a setup Pokemon that takes advantage of Sinistra's healing and Steelix's positive matchups into fairy types. When it's good, it's really good, but when it's bad, things feel impossible. Eventually, I come to a realization. Kommo-o just isn't right here. But part of the reason I was interested in Kommo-o was for its fighting coverage, a valuable type to have so I can hit Incineroar, Kingambit, and other Tyranitar. With Kommo-o out of contention, I decided to try the more popular fighting type, Sneasler. Sneasler is one of the most popular Pokemon in the format. Fighting types are hard to come by right now, and Sneasler also being a poison type means it not only doesn't take super effective damage from fairy moves, but it also hits them back for super effective damage itself. It is one of the most used Pokemon for a reason. Despite this, I've avoided putting it on the team so far because of the simple fact that Sneasler is weak to ground type moves. This isn't that big of a deal in a vacuum, but given that both Tyranitar and Steelix are weak to ground, adding a 3rd weakness to the team seemed like asking for trouble. And so I decided that if I was going to use Sneasler, I had to do something so that it can fight Garchomp, the #1 most used ground type by far. The most obvious thing to do here would be to give my Sneasler Ice Punch, but Sneasler doesn't learn Ice Punch, or any other ice type move. It also doesn't learn any dragon or fairy moves, Garchomp's 2 other weaknesses. So, question, what exactly is Sneasler supposed to do here? Survive. Sneasler is not a Pokemon known for its bulk, but here's the thing. One of my favorite things about competitive Pokemon is how much customization is given to the player. And what that means is that sometimes you're able to fully change how a Pokemon plays. Obviously, you can change a Pokemon's moves, item, and ability, but often the biggest changes come from how you train a Pokemon's stats. The player is given 66 stat points to distribute how they wish, plus a 10% boost in any stat other than their HP, thanks to a Pokemon's nature. While it is true that every Pokemon has immovable base stats, you can do more than you would expect with the stats you can influence. For example, even for a physically frail Pokemon like Sneasler, if you invest almost entirely in your defense and spend a ton of your remaining stat points in HP, you're able to survive Garchomp Earthquake. I don't think that many of my opponents this weekend will see this coming. But that's not all. With a jolly nature and the points I have left over, I have just enough stats to get my Sneasler to a speed stat of 173. This number, while meaningless in a vacuum, is extremely important in the context of the current format. It means that my Sneasler will not only outspeed all Garchomp, Charizard, and Mega Floette, but it also means it'll outspeed all Sneasler and Mega Frostlass without a speed boosting nature. And maybe you're thinking, Wolf, how on earth are you going to know whether these Pokemon have a speed boosting nature? And that's a good question because for every tournament prior, there would not have been a way for me to know. But at the Indianapolis Regional Championships, for the first time ever, natures, known in Champions as stat alignments, they're public information. We're now playing open nature. So my Sneasler will outspeed all Adamant Sneasler and Modest Frostlass. But that's not all. Because I am exactly 1 point faster than these two, that also means that if I see an opposing Sneasler or Frostlass with a speed boosting nature, I can play as if I am definitely the slower Pokemon. If I were max speed, I'd have to worry about speed ties. But because I am the slowest I can be while still being fast, I'll have a knowledge advantage from the beginning, while my opponent will have no idea whether or not they're faster, since they can only see my nature and not my stats. The downside of training Sneasler in this way is that, well, I don't have even a single point left to put into its attack stat. That being said, Sneasler naturally hits pretty hard, so I think that I'll be okay. It hits hard because of its move Close Combat, a super powerful move that lowers both of Sneasler's defense stats after it connects with a target. While normally lowering your own defenses is a bad thing, it's actually a huge help for Sneasler because of the interaction between its item and its ability. The item is the White Herb, which resets any stat drop Sneasler receives once per battle before being consumed. And when Sneasler's held item is consumed, it activates its ability Unburden, which doubles its speed stat. Sneasler is already naturally quite fast, but there's almost no Pokemon in the game that can outspeed it after Unburden activates. Sneasler's other moves are valuable too. Protect is standard and present on every Pokemon so far for a reason. Fake Out offers the team some valuable utility, flinching whatever it hits, buying time for Tyranitar to Dragon Dance, or Sinistcha to reposition. Sneasler's most dangerous move is its final one, Dire Claw. Nerfed since Scarlet and Violet, Dire Claw is still a dangerous middling power poison move that has a 30% chance of inflicting a poison, sleep, or paralysis on anything it hits. It basically ensures that you cannot ignore Sneasler unless you're feeling extra lucky or extra brave. This Sneasler is nicknamed who? Me? I'm hoping it'll be fitting with Dire Claw. Sneasler's addition to the team did the two things I thought that it would. It improved the team generally, and it made it weaker to Garchomp. I now need a Pokemon that can not only duel Garchomp, but neutralize it. And when thinking through which Pokemon could do this, I remembered a Pokemon that was the premier Garchomp answer over a decade ago. A Pokemon that was exceptional in the first generation I started playing, but has been labeled as washed up in recent years. Thankfully, washed is just what I need. Rotom Wash is an exceptionally fair Pokemon. It's bulky, but not absurdly so. It has great typing with an ability that makes it even better, and moves that do reliable but not shocking damage. However, in recent years, being a fair Pokemon really isn't enough to keep up with the power level of Fluttermane, Urshifu, and Miraidon. But right now, I think that Rotom Wash is exceptionally well positioned. As a water and electric type, it only has two weaknesses, grass and ground. Grass is exceptionally rare nowadays aside from Sinistcha, and ground isn't actually a weakness of Rotom's, it's an immunity. With its Levitate ability, Rotom is immune to all ground type moves. So Rotom is already a valuable addition, since it can switch in safely against the ground type moves that threaten Sneasler, Tyranitar, and Steelix. But switching in alone isn't enough. Rotom has to actually do something in exchange. Fortunately for me, it can. Rotom learns the fire-type move Will-O-Wisp, an 85% accurate move that inflicts whatever it hits with a burn. Remember how Machagacha was dangerous because of its 20% chance to burn? Well, Will-O-Wisp is guaranteed so long as it hits. I cannot overstate enough how valuable burns are for this team. Burning Garchomp is, for this team, basically better than knocking it out. It means it not only can't do more than a quarter to Steelix, but it also can't meaningfully damage Mega Tyranitar, who now has leeway to set up Dragon Dances in its face. Normally, the damage that burned Pokemon do will add up if you ignore them for too long, but Sinistcha offsets that downside by healing off any of the damage you take while you set up or you focus down its partners. So we have two ways to inflict burns. neutralizing the physical attackers of the format. But what about the special attackers? Well, believe it or not, Rotom can help with them too, with the move Light Screen. This move reduces all incoming special damage by 1/3 for the next 5 turns. This is already a powerful effect on its own, but it works especially well with Mega Tyranitar, who gets an additional 50% damage reduction on special moves as long as the sand is up. Combining these two forms of damage reduction results in a Pokemon nearly impossible to remove on the special side, even before you factor in the healing from Hospitality. Since Tyranitar can increase its attack and speed, and Rotom Wash can effectively augment its defense and special defense, this 2 Pokemon combo takes a Pokemon with some of the best stats in the entire game to begin with, and is able to functionally raise every single relevant one. Even its HP stat, which is the only stat that wasn't raised before, effectively is raised when you factor in Sinistcha. Rotom is the one Pokemon on this team who does not have Protect. It's naturally bulky enough that it can afford to be a little bit more vulnerable, and I wanted to use both Thunderbolt and Hydro Pump for damage so that foes can't afford to just ignore my little washing machine. The default item on Rotom is the Citrus Berry, but Sinistcha is already holding that. Instead, I'll use Leftovers, which heals 6% of Rotom's maximum health at the end of every turn. It isn't quite as reliable of an item as Citrus Berry, given that the healing is slower and you need to get maximum value out of it for 5 turns before it actually gives more healing, but with all the damage reduction, it really can add up here. It helps that if Rotom starts getting too low, I can top it up with Sinistcha. I don't need to only heal my offensive Pokemon. Rotom is trained to outspeed Modest Pelipper, with the remaining points invested into its bulk. It's nicknamed Spring Clean, which is a triple pun that I'm quite proud of. First, spring cleaning is a practice of tidying up when springtime comes, and Rotom is a washing machine, useful for spring cleaning. Rotom is also a water type, and where's one place that water can come from? A spring. It shoots a spring of water out to clean. Lastly, Spring Clean sounds a little like sprinkling, which their Pokemon can experience if Hydro Pump narrowly misses. These 5 Pokemon work together well to form the main core of the team, and I'm pleased to report that they're able to handle the majority of teams in the format. However, there are a few major issues that remain. The first is Kommo-o. This incredibly bulky dragon type is capable of boosting all of its stats and then outputting spread dragon damage or single target fighting damage. I don't have a single move on this team so far that can hit it for super effective damage, and it 1 or 2 shots every single one of my Pokemon. The second issue is Mega Venusaur. With ground and grass coverage, it hits 4 of my 5 Pokemon for super effective damage, and I can't really do much back. The last issue is the combination of Incineroar and Sinistcha, 2 Pokemon that aren't so threatening on their own, but are paired with various setup threats like Mega Floette and the aforementioned Kommo-o. Between Intimidate, Fake Out, Parting Shot, Hospitality, Life Dew, and Rage Powder, I'm unable to break through them quickly, which often results in whichever Pokemon is setting up blasting through my team. This is, unfortunately, a pretty wide list of Pokemon to beat, and it's even harder because with 2 Mega Pokemon already on the team, I cannot afford a third. I spend a lot of time thinking about the problem, and eventually I realize something. A majority of these Pokemon are weak to flying type moves. The issue is, of course, that strong flying type moves are hard to come by. On the special side, the only real option is Hurricane, but that move is inaccurate outside of the rain, which I don't have. On the physical side, the move that I need is Brave Bird, but there's almost no Pokemon that can learn it, and most of them have something wrong with them that prevents them from working here. The only real options are Corviknight, who is too slow, and Talonflame, who is too weak. Unless... Talonflame is a Pokemon that, nowadays, is used as a supporter. Its ability Gale Wings gives priority to its flying type moves as long as Talonflame is at full HP, and so people use it to set Tailwind up before their other Pokemon can move. The standard set right now actually doesn't even use an item, allowing it to get a big power boost on the move Acrobatics, which doubles in power if you don't have a held item. Talonflame will normally be trained heavily in its speed and its bulk, and sometimes uses other supporting moves like Will-O-Wisp and Quick Guard. Given that Talonflame has a lower attack stat than Doduo, it's not shocking that people prefer to use it as a supporter. But it wasn't always this way. When Talonflame was first released, Gale Wings worked differently. In fact, it gave priority to all of its flying type moves, regardless of how much health Talonflame had left. Having priority on a 120 base power move, the same base power as Close Combat by the way, turns out to be a pretty big deal. And so, for much of the first year that Talonflame was legal, players would use it with the Choice Band item, giving it a 50% power boost and tearing through teams before their Pokemon got to make a move. This set earned the name Win Button Talonflame, and for good reason. Anybody who played back in 2014 knows that Talonflame should not be underestimated. So when I saw that Talonflame learned Brave Bird, and I thought to myself that Talonflame was too weak to actually make use of it, something stirred inside of me. A memory of the Talonflame of old, of the glory of the Phoenix, of the hours I spent staring at the team builder trying to find a way to stop it. And in this same moment, I realized something. My team has no use for Tailwind. Steelix and Sinister are way too slow to care, Rotom is a supporter and doesn't even really care about attacking second, and Tyranitar and Sneasler boost their own speed stats. In other words, if I were to put Talonflame on this team, I'll have a free move slot. Choice Band is no longer in the game, but there's another way for Talonflame to boost its damage output, with the move Swords Dance, which increases its attack by 2 stages. Between Fake Out, Hospitality, and Wide Guard, I actually have a fair bit of support for a Swords Dance Talonflame. Hospitality can even help me regain Gale Wings if I were to lose it. Moreover, 2 of the Pokemon that I need the most help with can't do anything against Talonflame. Talonflame has a quadruple resistance to grass and it resists fire. It is true that Incineroar can intimidate Talonflame, but that's only 1 drop, while Swords Dance is 2 boosts. In other words, if my opponent wants to race, they'll lose. Talonflame has priority flying moves, capable of hitting Kommo-o even after it's boosted its speed, and it also does a ton of damage even to Mega Venusaur. In theory, it does everything that I need. In theory. Before I can test, I need to finish the set. Protect and Swords Dance are mandatory, and I think that Flare Blitz is too. There's no better fire type move that it learns after all. The question now is, which flying type move should I use? Dual Wing Beat is weaker than other options and can miss, but it hits twice and you can use that to break focus sashes. But I hate it, so I'm ruling it out. That leaves 2 options. Brave Bird, which is what I originally was looking for in the first place and is the strongest option, but has recoil damage, which will break my Gale Wings and shorten Talonflame's lifespan, and Acrobatics, which is almost as strong as Brave Bird and doesn't have any recoil damage, but requires me to give up my item. Phrased in this way, Acrobatics seems like the better choice, but I'm going with Brave Bird. That's because there is an item that I want to use, the Sharp Beak. It gives a 20% damage boost to all of Talonflame's flying type moves. And looking at the numbers, this damage boost matters a lot. After a Swords Dance with Sharp Beak and Brave Bird, Talonflame will KO Garchomp if they're more offensive, and also should KO every single Mega Floette regardless of how they're trained. I don't need Talonflame to beat the entire enemy team on its own, I just need it to rip a hole through the defensive Pokemon my other team members struggle with. And the best way to do that is with sheer power. I train Talonflame mostly in its speed and attack, but I take a few points out of speed to invest in its HP. With the speed stat I picked, I'll still outspeed every single Sneasler and Mega Frostlass, so I don't think I need to be much faster, and the few extra points of health that gives my Talonflame probably matters because if things are going well for Talonflame, it should be doing a lot of damage to itself. I nicknamed Talonflame Glory Reborn, in the hopes that some of the strength of the Talonflames of yore will coalesce into this Phoenix once more. A slight elephant in the room, Incineroar, the greatest Pokemon of all time, not present on the team. It's not that I think Incineroar is bad, in fact my team is actually quite weak to it even with this Talonflame. It just doesn't really fit here. When I had Kommo on the team, I did have Incineroar, like I did try it out, and it is good with Steelix and Tyranitar, but I just felt like the team was too slow. We will see if I end up regretting this. And with that, the team is complete. Here's the rental code if you want to try it out for yourself. I know that team building can sometimes seem intimidating if you're a newer player, and maybe more so watching one of these in-depth breakdowns. If you're interested in targeted videos to help you get better at specific skills within competitive Pokemon, including team building, I have a Patreon where I post 3 extra videos per month. My goal with the Patreon is not only to put fun bonus content on there, including tons of extra battling and laddering content, but also to have it as a resource for anyone who wants to improve at anything in competitive Pokemon. There's actually an 8-week masterclass on there intended to teach you everything you need to know to get started with competitive Pokemon, and there's also individual videos that go up every month that are a deep dive into individual skills. The Patreon makes it possible for us to spend a long time on longer videos like this one, so if you have the means and you want to support or you want to get better at competitive Pokemon, please check it out. And with that, I'm out of time. The tournament is here. I get in the plane to Indianapolis, the same city I went to for my first national championship almost exactly 15 years ago. As I move through the familiar ground of the convention center, I take a deep breath. My first tournament of Pokemon Champions, and one of my last chances to qualify for the World Championships this year, is starting now. As I head to my seat for round 1, I remind myself how today is gonna work. The first day of the tournament is phase 1, where we'll play 8 rounds. The only way to advance to phase 2 is to win 6 of those 8 games, and making phase 2 is very important as it's the only way I can guarantee championship points, which I need to qualify for Worlds. If I make phase 2, there will be 4 additional rounds, but all of the wins and losses from phase 1 carry over. At the end of these 12 games, most of the players with 10 wins will advance to the final phase, which we call Top Cut, a bracket where a loss means you're out, and you play until there's only one player left standing. But before I can think about Top Cut, I need to think about round 1. As I exchange team sheets with my opponent, I look at what I'm up against and I see a very unusual team. Well, I guess the Pokemon themselves are somewhat standard. Charizard Y, Basculegion, Garchomp, Aerodactyl, and Archaludon are all the usual suspects, and Sableye isn't that strange nowadays either. But the movesets on these Pokemon are where things take a turn. This Sableye has not only Sunny Day, but Rain Dance, and a move that you almost never see, Wonder Room. A move that I confused with Magic Room until the set was over. I was like, why are my leftovers working? I don't get it. Anyway, the real focus here is the dual weather. Not only does the rain enable my opponent's Archaludon and Basculegion, but it also powers up their Charizard counterintuitively. This Charizard has Hurricane, which becomes 100% accurate in the rain. I have never played against a team like this before. I am gonna have to figure it out on the fly. Game 1 begins with my Rotom and Tyranitar against their Sableye and Archaludon. They Rain Dance as I Dragon Dance and set up a light screen. Archaludon goes for an Electro Shot, and it crits my Rotom, doing 90%. Normally, a critical hit does 50% more damage, but here it's even more devastating because it also ignores light screen, meaning this critical hit did twice as much damage as it was supposed to. The first attack I took at a Champions Tournament was a critical hit. That cannot be good. And it's not. I double up on Archaludon as they set Reflect, leaving them with about 30% as they Dragon Pulse to KO my Rotom. I send out Sneasler, but Archaludon lives close combat and fires off a Flash Cannon, which crits Tyranitar, knocking it out in just one hit. Somehow I am still almost able to win the game, but Machagacha misses both of my opponent's Pokemon. And because I missed both, I just narrowly don't have enough health to beat Basculegion in the end. Not only did I get crit on the first turn of my first Champions Tournament, but I lost the first ever game that I played. Is it over? Am I washed? Is it time to hang up the Joy-Cons? Well, I'm stressed, but I'm not panicking. I know that without both of those crits, that game goes very differently. And so I am somewhat relieved when game 2 begins with the exact same leads. The turn 1 is the same, but this time they don't get the crit. I double Archaludon on turn 2 as they go for a second Rain Dance, just in case I Mega Evolve Tyranitar. But Rotom lives a second Electro Shot. Now I'm able to KO Archaludon and knock off Sableye for half of its health. And with boosted Tyranitar and Rotom still alive, I'm able to win the game without even revealing my final Pokemon, Steelix. But game 3 features an adjustment. My opponent leads with Sableye and Charizard. On paper, this seems like a great matchup for Tyranitar, but it's a bait. They Mega Evolve, but I protect Tyranitar. And I was right to do so because Sableye immediately uses Rain Dance, overriding the Sun to allow Charizard to use a Water-type Weather Ball, a move that would have KO'd Tyranitar if I hadn't protected. Fortunately, I did, and I set up a light screen. Now the question is, will Weather Ball get the KO with light screen active? I have no intention of finding out. I switch Tyranitar to Sinistcha as my opponent goes for the same Rain Dance and Weather Ball play, thinking that I'll Mega Evolve. And Rotom lands a Rain boosted Hydro Pump, knocking out Charizard in just one hit. Archaludon comes out, but with light screen already up and Charizard already down, I've got a huge lead, and I'm able to win the game without even needing to reveal Steelix once more. Well, that wasn't fun. Hopefully in round 2, I can get an easier match. Well, remember how I said I added Talonflame specifically because I couldn't beat Kommo-o? Well, my next opponent has Kommo-o and Incineroar and Sinistcha. In theory, Talonflame looks very good here, but their Mega Evolution is Mega Manectric, a Mega that not only outspeeds Talonflame and KOs it, but also has Intimidate. 1 Intimidate isn't enough to offset Swords Dance, but 2 is, and they have 2 Intimidators. And worst of all, this team also has Corviknight with Bulk Up, which is a Pokemon that I really need Rotom to beat. And so in the first game, I bring Rotom, Tyranitar, Sneasler, and Talonflame, and I get completely run over by Kommo-o while Corviknight gets left behind. I just can't damage the stupid cow. The Intimidators lock out my Talonflame, and Rotom is useless here as it just allows Kommo-o to set up for free. I never really had a shot. I realized that I need Synestia. I can use Rage Powder to protect my Talonflame and Hospitality to heal it up. I can even go for Trick Room in a pinch. Of course, bringing Synestia means I probably need to leave behind Rotom. And if my opponent brings Corviknight to game 2, I'm gonna have a really hard time. But given how badly they just ran me over with Kommo-o, I'm willing to bet that they're not feeling pressured to change anything. Game 2 features the same Pokemon from my opponent. I use Mega Steelix and Tyranitar early against the double Intimidate lead to get some damage down on the board, and when the position is just right, I switch Talonflame in. I use Wide Guard from Steelix to block Kommo-o's Spread Dragon move, Clanging Scales, and I use this turn to set up a Swords Dance. I later use Synestia to get Trick Room up, using the momentum to clear some of the supporting Pokemon. In the end, it comes down to a 2 against 2, my Talonflame and Synestia against their Manectric and Kommo-o. It's the last turn of Trick Room and Kommo-o just protected. If they get the 1 in 3 chance of a double protect, I'm going to lose. I hold my breath as Kommo-o goes for it and fails. Brave Bird knocks it out, and somehow we're going to a game 3. In the third game, I decided to stick with my game plan, setting Talonflame up at the first opportunity. This time though, I'm able to get rid of the Kommo-o early, though I have to sacrifice Talonflame and most of Steelix to do it. I claw the game back little by little, and eventually I make it to an end game that I think I'm favored in. It's my Synestia against their Manectric at 80%, but their Manectric has Snarl. It's not that strong, but it is super effective, and it drops my special attack, meaning each Machagacha will do less than the previous one. In order to win this, I think I need a burn. The first Snarl connects, doing good damage, more than I was expecting, but Machagacha lands true and burns. With this, my Synestia would win eventually, but the next Machagacha crits and seals the game. Somehow, I have won round 2 against a matchup so bad that I could not have dreamed it up. The third round is against a Sun team, a matchup that my team is designed to beat. It ends up being much closer than I would have liked. I barely win game 1 and I lose game 2, but I'm able to close it out convincingly in the third game, putting me at a record of 3 wins and 0 losses. And the skies are staying sunny as my round 4 opponent is using the standard Sun team, popularized by a Japanese player named Suika. I've played against it more than any other team in practice, and I think that my matchup is quite good. However, there's a problem. I cannot connect to my opponent. In fact, it seems like most of the people here can't connect. There's some kind of issue with the venue Wi-Fi, I guess. After a lot of waiting, my opponent and I are able to finally get into battle, but maybe the Wi-Fi was trying to protect me, because despite this being a matchup that I thought was favorable, things are not going my way. My opponent makes the perfect play turn after turn, ignoring my boosted Tyranitar and doubling into my Synestia to KO it before I can move. Garchomp survives Mega Tyranitar knockoff with 1%, letting it KO Tyranitar in return, and now I cannot beat their Charizard in the late game. I lose game 1, but game 2 I bring it back, keeping Synestia safe and setting Trick Room at just the right time, letting me beat the Basculegion before it can run away with the game. For the 4th time in a row, it's all coming down to game 3. And my opponent switches their leads up, showing 2 new Pokemon, Aerodactyl and Sylveon. This is not good. I left Steelix behind, who is my best answer to these 2. I'm forced to play defensively, using Light Screen and Protect as my opponent Mega Evolves Aerodactyl and goes for a Tailwind and Hyper Voice, doing tons of damage to my Rotom. I'm forced to risk Rock Slide flinches now. I Mega Evolve Tyranitar as they Hyper Voice and Rock Slide, and neither of my Pokemon flinch. Rotom barely survives with less than 10 HP, and burns Aerodactyl as Tyranitar sets up a Dragon Dance. They have 2 turns left of Tailwind now as Rotom faints to the sand, giving me a free switch into Sneasler. I think about this turn long and hard. I could go for Fake Out and Rock Slide, but if I do that, I'll probably lose to Garchomp later on. I think I need another Dragon Dance. I hold my breath, but my opponent protects both of their Pokemon. Fake Out is blocked, but my second Dragon Dance goes off, and now I'm in control. I protect both of my Pokemon, letting Tailwind expire, and on the following turn, Rock Slide picks up a double KO. My opponent sends out Kingambit and Garchomp, and knock off KO's Garchomp as close combat KO's Kingambit. I win round 4, putting me at a record of 4 wins and 0 losses in the tournament. But round 4 isn't over for everyone. In fact, the Wi-Fi issues are so bad that this round will go on for over 3 hours in total. On paper, this sounds frustrating, and I think for many players it was. But personally, I'm actually pretty grateful for the break. Every single one of my sets so far has been 3 games, and I've lost 3 of those game 1s. It's nice to chill out, go get a salad, and hang out with my friends. I asked them to explain what's happening in the NBA to me right now using Pokemon terms, and they let me know that Victor Wembanyama is Raging Bolt. If that makes sense to you, please go outside. Eventually, the round finishes, and round 5 finally goes up. And I am up against another abysmal matchup. This is a Mega Venusaur team, who I would normally use Talonflame to beat, but they have Farigiraf, preventing me from using any priority moves, which includes Talonflame's Brave Bird when it has Gale Wings active at full HP. Worse, they have Choice Scarf Garchomp, meaning that my Talonflame is threatened after I lose Gale Wings. They also have Body Press Torkoal, complicating my normally good matchup and enabling the Sleep Powder Venusaur before it Mega Evolves. Despite the poor matchup, I'm in the lead in game 1. Steelix is on the field inside of Trick Room, and I can wide guard to lock out the Torkoal. But Tyranitar switching in was a little bit too telegraphed, and they hard read me on the turn that I bring in Tyranitar, committing both Helping Hand and Body Press, catching the switched in Tyranitar. Now I am unable to stop them from winning the Weather War, meaning that Steelix can no longer beat Torkoal. For the 4th time in 5 rounds, I lose game 1. Game 2, I realized that I need to get the lead early, and that means setting up my Talonflame. I am able to set Swords Dance up for free, but I do it on the turn that my opponent brings in Farigiraf. Now, as long as I'm full health, I cannot Brave Bird the Venusaur. What's the solution? Simple. Don't be at full health. I protect Talonflame and I switch into Tyranitar, using the sand to break my own Gale Wings. A really fun play, which my opponent unfortunately sees coming. On the turn that I bring in Tyranitar, they switch Farigiraf out into their Choice Scarf Garchomp. Now, I don't have the priority I would need to move first, and I just protected. My Talonflame is totally vulnerable, and this is my only way through this Venusaur. But I have one last trick up my sleeve. If I lost priority by not being at full health, getting back to full health gives me back the priority. I switch Tyranitar out into Sinisha. Hospitality only heals Talonflame for 6%, but 6% is all I need. After flipping the switch on my ability twice in a row, Brave Bird knocks out the Venusaur, and even though Rock Slide revenges Talonflame, it's already done its job. Tyranitar has been put to sleep, but that's okay, since my opponent lets me knock out Garchomp in order to get Trick Room up. All I need to win is Steelix. I use Wide Guard to completely wall out the Torkoal, stalling out Trick Room, and when it finally ends, High Horsepower knocks out Torkoal in one shot. Left with only Farigiraf, my opponent forfeits, and I win game 2. But the problem is, I don't think I'm going to be able to do the Talonflame toggle again in a game 3 situation. It requires way too much to get going against both Farigiraf and Garchomp. And if they'd recognized what I was going to do, they could have just switched back into Farigiraf and completely messed me up. And so, even though it is on the team specifically to beat Venusaur, I decided to leave Talonflame behind for Rotom. To be clear, I don't think that Rotom can beat Venusaur, but this Venusaur doesn't have Protect. And based on how these games have went, I'm pretty sure it's trained to be more offensive than defensive. My idea here is that if I can just use Rotom to protect my team, I can beat Venusaur with another Pokemon, Tyranitar. Game 3 starts with their Farigiraf and Garchomp against my Rotom and Tyranitar. Garchomp switches out as both Farigiraf and Tyranitar protect, but Rotom lands a Will-O-Wisp on the switched in Venusaur. This probably doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, Venusaur is a special attacker. But between the burn and the sand, Venusaur is taking 12% a turn in passive damage alone. They switch Farigiraf out to Garchomp as I Mega Evolve and go for a Rock Slide and Light Screen, and Tyranitar flinches Venusaur, who is now below half health. I'm able to get my Sinistcha in safely as I protect Tyranitar, blocking Stomping Tantrum and Giga Drain. And now, one more Rock Slide KOs the Venusaur. From here, I'm in control, because, of course, my last unrevealed Pokemon is Steelix. Wide Guard protects my team from the powerful Fire-type moves of Torkoal and a late-game Garchomp who's locked into Rock Slide. Between Steelix and Rotom, who's still healthy, I'm able to drive a wedge through my opponent's offense and close out the game. Somehow, I win round 5. One more win gets me to tomorrow and guarantees I get some championship points. But when I see the matchup I'll be facing, I have a feeling that I won't be getting this win in round 6. Not only am I up against another Komao team, but this one is somehow even worse of a matchup. They also have Incineroar and Sinistcha, but their other Pokemon are huge threats for Talonflame specifically. Basculegion and Mega Glimmora are both Pokemon I really don't want to fight with the bird. Worse than the team members though is the specific Komao set. This Komao has Iron Defense and Body Press. I have 3 special attacks on my team, period, and all of them are resisted by Dragon. Komao will double its defense, output huge damage, and have Intimidate and Recovery and Redirection to get around the Talonflame. How on earth am I supposed to win? The answer is, I'm not. At least not in game 1. Despite burning the Komao, they just Iron Defense 3 times and Body Press all of my Pokemon to death. I lose very quickly. In game 2, I decide to try and win via a war of attrition. I go for knockoff and Will-O-Wisp into Coma-O on the first turn, hoping that the passive damage will wear it down. Will-O-Wisp misses and Coma-O goes for body press, knocking out Tyranitar, who would have survived otherwise. This was a terrible turn, but I don't give up. I get Talonflame in and I go for a Swords Dance. My opponent uses Parting Shot to send out Frostlass, and I have no idea if Flare Blitz will KO. I decide I have to go for it, and Frostlass goes down in just one hit. I'm able to burn Coma-O as well, and I use Talonflame to knock out the Sinistcha and Incineroar, though my bird buddy does eventually fly south for the winter. Thankfully, my last Pokemon is Sinistcha, who always beats burnt Coma-O with no item. Somehow, I win game 2. This matchup is almost unthinkably bad, but if I can just win one more game, I'll never have to play against it again. There are so many things that can go wrong against this team, but I don't need to account for every single thing my opponent can do. I just need to beat one option, the thing that they're actually going to do. I think they're going to change their Pokemon up, bringing Coma-O in the back instead of the front. I think they're going to want to use their best offensive tools to get rid of Rotom first, and then win with Coma-O later. And so I decide to make a prediction. My opponent is going to lead with Mega Glamora. So I start with Sneasler and Tyranitar, hoping to call them out. And I was right. My opponent did change their Pokemon up. But I was wrong about what they switched to. It's Basculegion and Frostlass. If I had led Rotom again, this would be amazing. But I left Rotom behind for Sneasler against a team with 3 ghost types. Not my best decision. With Talonflame and Sinistcha in the back, I have no switch in for Choice Scarf, Wave Crash, and Blizzard. This battle looks like it's already over. But I can see one very narrow way I could stay in this game. I generally like to play Pokemon in a way that minimizes risk, and that usually means not relying on super high variance moves. But in such a brutal matchup, I will take what I can get. And here, that means opening up Pandora's Casino. I protect Tyranitar as Frostlass Mega Evolves. Basculegion locks into Wave Crash, but it's blocked by Protect, as Frostlass goes for Blizzard. Last to move is Sneasler, who goes for Dire Claw into the Basculegion and gets a Paralysis. I'm back! They switch Frostlass to Coma-O as I Mega Evolve Tyranitar. I Dire Claw Coma-O for some chip and knock off KO's Basculegion. They send out Incineroar, and I realize that since they revealed all their Pokemon, it means that they don't actually have Sinistcha. All damage that I do is permanent. I knock off Coma-O as they Iron Defense, but now the sand is starting to add up. I'm able to get Talonflame in and use it to finish off Coma-O, though I have to sacrifice both Talonflame and Sneasler to do it. This makes the endgame my Tyranitar and Sinistcha against their Frostlass and Incineroar. The only way they can win is to freeze my Tyranitar in the sand. They go for it. Blizzard hits both and freezes Sinistcha. Tyranitar goes for a Dragon Dance, and Rock Slide ends the game the next turn. Somehow, I win round 6 and advance to day 2 of the tournament. In 6 rounds, I played 6 game 3s, and 5 of those were sets where I lost game 1. This team might feel strong, but I sure am working hard to squeeze out its full potential. I'm exhausted and my nerves are shot, but I've made day 2, and I finally get a little respite in round 7. I'm paired against a sand team, an incredible matchup due to the strength of my Rotom Wash, Steelix, and Sinistcha. In the first game, I'm able to knock out Corviknight on the very first turn without giving up much in exchange at all. I press my advantage, and my opponent forfeits on the 5th turn of the battle. Game 2 is dicier. I make a bold play early and I get it right, leaving my Sneasler vulnerable in the face of Excadrill, who Rock Slides. And I was going for close combat to KO Tyranitar, but I flinch, and I find myself having to scramble. The endgame is close, but I make the crucial call, knocking out their Rotom Wash while Tyranitar protects itself. And I close out the set in just 2 games for the first time all day, putting me at a record of 7 wins and 0 losses in the tournament. But remember, the wins today carry over, and I need 11 out of 12 of them to guarantee a spot in the top cut. So even though I've made it to tomorrow, this is no time to take my feet off the gas, especially because my final round of the day will be on stream.
Steelix.
Yeah.
That is a Mega Evolution that has been around for a long time.
And it's been around for a long time, and it hasn't really been used at all in a lot of competitive environments.
Jake's right, but I have a feeling that in this matchup, Steelix will be able to show just why he's on the team. My opponent has a bit of an anti-meta team built around Archaludon. The general idea here is to use a Spothra to give it tons of stat boosts. Speed Boost raises a Spothra's speed every turn, and it can raise its special attack and special defense with Calm Mind as well. Baton Pass will then switch a Spothra out. giving all of its stat boosts to whichever Pokemon comes in. To protect Espathra while it sets up, my opponent has both Incineroar and Scovillain, who will burn any Pokemon that attacks it with its ability Spicy Spray. A hard task to avoid given that Scovillain also has Rage Powder to redirect attacks. The team also has weather control of its own in Choice Scarf Politoed, a dangerous Pokemon if I let it get into position. Fortunately, I do have a clear best Pokemon in the matchup, Steelix. It's immune to Electroshock, and it resists both of our Caledon's other moves as well. My game plan will be to get rid of the support and then win with Steelix in the end. Game 1 begins with my Sneasler and Tyranitar against my opponent's Espathra and Incineroar. White Herb activates immediately thanks to the Intimidate, doubling my Sneasler's speed stat. I fake out Espathra, but my opponent doesn't go for a fake out of their own. This leaves my Tyranitar free to Rock Slide, hitting both my opponent's Pokemon, dropping them both to just above half health, and flinching the Incineroar. The perfect turn 1. Close Combat is now free. I knock out Incineroar before it gets to make a single move. Espathra retaliates with Lumina Crash, knocking out my Sneasler, and Tyranitar ends the turn with a knockoff. But will it do enough damage?
But will it be enough to survive after that chip? It does survive with 21 HP.
If I had Mega Evolved Tyranitar, I would have KO'd Espathra, but I wasn't familiar with my Colbur Berry Espathra calcs, so I had no idea in the moment if Mega Evolving would get it. I send out Sinistcha as my opponent sends out Archaludon. Here, there's two threatening plays that my opponent can go for. The first is to go for a double up into my Sinistcha, using Lumina Crash to drop my special defense, and then Dragon Pulse to try and get the knockout. The other is for them to Baton Pass, switching in their last Pokemon and giving it several accumulated speed boosts. In both cases, my Tyranitar is safe on this turn, and I want to get it off the field to reset the weather later and to get rid of this Intimidate drop. It's time to get Tyranitar out, and the Golden Goose in. But my opponent switches too, retreating Archaludon and sending out Politoed. They do this so they can Baton Pass, giving their multiple speed boosts to Archaludon. Unfortunately for them, I didn't take the bait. My Sinistcha uses Trick Room, turning those speed boosts against Archaludon. I switch Sinistcha out, regaining control of the weather, and I launch a high horsepower into Archaludon, dealing over 90% to this defensive behemoth. Politoed fires off a Muddy Water, which drops my Tyranitar's accuracy, and my opponent actually reads the switch correctly. Doubling Tyranitar with a Flash Cannon, it just barely survives. But remember, this Politoed is holding the Choice Scarf. It is now locked into Muddy Water. So I switch Tyranitar back out into Sinistcha, healing off half of what Politoed did. Archaludon protects, but this turn I'm focusing on defense. Steelix uses Wide Guard and completely blocks Muddy Water, keeping me in the driver's seat without taking any more damage. My opponent switches Politoed out and goes for a double protect, which they get, blocking the high horsepower as Machagacha KOs Espathra. There's one more turn of Trick Room and then I'll lose the speed advantage. I have to make this turn count. I switch Sinistcha out one more time, resetting the weather. Archaludon goes for the triple protect, but it fails, and Steelix takes the KO. Politoed is the last to move, but it goes for Weather Ball, which is now a rock-type move, and my opponent forfeits, understanding the battle is lost. That went well, but I did get a flinch on the first turn, and my opponent didn't bring Mega Scovillain, who is a big threat for my Steelix and Tyranitar. I expect that Game 2 will probably be a little bit less smooth. In Game 2, I lead with the same Pokemon, but my opponent switches things up, starting with Scovillain and Espathra. They Mega Evolve right away as I fake out Espathra and Dragon Dance. Luckily for me, Scovillain goes for Flamethrower into Tyranitar instead of Giga Drain, likely predicting me to switch out. I protect Sneasler, fearing Lumina Crash, but my opponent reads it, going for Calm Mind. I Dragon Dance again as Giga Drain comes out, doing a ton of damage to Tyranitar. My opponent protects both their Pokemon, collecting a third speed boost. Now they finally Baton Pass, and this is a very heavy baton. Whichever Pokemon comes in is getting 3 speed boosts as well as a special attack and a special defense boost, and the recipient is none other than Archaludon. Rock Slide connects on both Pokemon, knocking out Scovillain, but giving Archaludon a defense raise on top of its stat boost Flapjack stack. While Scovillain leaves behind a parting gift, burning Tyranitar with its Spicy Spray, I accounted for this. Knowing that my Tyranitar would move before my Sneasler, this lets me land a close combat into Archaludon, which it survives, but only just. Sneasler shrugs off the stat drops with its White Herb and activates Unburden, doubling its speed. Now I have a choice to make. My Sneasler is the fastest Pokemon on the field, and that means that I can try and KO this Archaludon with close combat. If they protect though, the move would be wasted. But if I protect, I give Espathra a speed boost and Archaludon another turn of recovery with the leftovers. I decide to attack, but Archaludon protects. I knock off a Spothra, hoping to KO, but
Before the Cobra Berry activates. But that is a crazy survival from this Spothra.
Yeah.
It's gonna be able to get the Luna Crash off into the Sneasler and bring in something new.
that is unfortunate. I think I probably had a better play in hindsight. Maybe this was the time I was supposed to Mega Evolve my Tyranitar. The game isn't over yet though, as I send out Sinistcha. If I can get Trick Room up, I can still win this game, but I make a mistake. I forget that Archaludon is faster than a Spothra, and so even though I could Trick Room here for free, I instead protect. I block both Flash Cannon and Lumina Crash, and I land a knockoff into Archaludon, doing good damage and removing its leftovers, stopping it from healing. This looks like a good turn on paper, but now Spothra gets a second speed boost. Spothra's only got 2 speed boosts to Archaludon's 3, but it's also a naturally faster Pokemon by a good bit. There's one big question. Will it outspeed Archaludon now? And so I switch Sinistcha out into Steelix, but this is a slow Spothra, and so Archaludon moves first. This was another chance to Trick Room that I missed. Worse still, I make an even bigger mistake. I go for the 90% accurate Rock Slide and I miss Spothra. This was just a blunder, plain and simple. I didn't need the 4 points of damage onto Archaludon, and I really needed to get rid of the Spothra on this turn. It was just total autopilot here to Rock Slide when knockoff was safer. If I'd KO'd Spothra, I'd be able to win the game from the position. But now, for the first time since the set began, I'm losing. I switch Tyranitar out, healing Steelix, but my opponent reads it, doubling the Sinistcha who just switched in. This does leave Steelix free to KO Archaludon, but it also means there's no resetting my 2 special defense drops now. My opponent reveals that their last Pokemon is Politoed, as I send out Tyranitar, and this means that I win the Weather War. But it also means that I don't have an easy way to get through this frog, due to its typing and bulk. Politoed could lock into Muddy Water, which wins the game if I don't Wide Guard, or it can Ice Beam, which I can beat if I Dragon Dance on this turn. I think it's too risky to Dragon Dance, and so I protect both my Pokemon, scouting for whichever move Politoed goes for. But this is the wrong play, and the play that ultimately will cost me this game. My opponent locks into Ice Beam. It's not a very strong move, but it's enough here. I go for the double protect on Steelix, but it fails, and Steelix goes down to a double up. I Dragon Dance, but it's just barely too little too late. The sand knocks out a Spothra as the burn wears down my Tyranitar, and it's the burn that ultimately does me in. Ice Beam does not KO Tyranitar, but knockoff leaves Politoed alive. If I had just one more turn, I could Rock Slide now that my Tyranitar is faster, but the burn kicks in and Tyranitar faints. I lose game 2. For the 7th time today, I've got to play game 3. I'm kicking myself a little bit because I know that I made some pretty obvious mistakes. At the same time, I also know that this has been an exhausting day. And ultimately, it doesn't matter which path I took to get here. All that matters is that I win game 3. The good news is, that's what I've been doing all day. So, game 3. My final game of the day, win or lose. The best way to win is to understand why I lost. And I think the answer here is that I didn't use my boosted Tyranitar well enough. With that being said, I think I know what to do in game number 3. The battle begins with the same lead from me for the 3rd time. My opponent goes back to their lead from game 1, however, Spothra and Incineroar. But remember how this played out in game 1? I went for Fake Out into Spothra and Rock Slide, and because I flinched Incineroar, I gained a massive lead. My opponent has a way to stop this from happening though. They can use Fake Out into my Tyranitar, which is what I expect, and what I try and punish. I switch Tyranitar out, bringing in Steelix, and Fake Out lands into a Spothra. Incineroar is the next to move, using Fake Out into Steelix, exactly what I hoped for. Spothra flinches before boosting its speed, but it's in danger. With Sand active and Intimidate cleared, Steelix is threatening a one-hit KO on this bulky bird. I Mega Evolve, but Spothra protects. Fortunately, this leaves Incineroar completely open, and Close Combat takes the one-hit KO, putting me in the lead 4 against 3. Unfortunately, the Pokemon my opponent sends out to take Incineroar's place isn't Politoed or Archaludon, but Scovillain. This means they've left one of Politoed or Archaludon behind, but it also means that my Steelix is in immediate danger. In fact, my Sneasler is in danger too. Both my Pokemon could go down this turn if I'm not careful. So I switch Steelix out, back into Tyranitar as Scovillain Mega Evolves.
Wolf does not want that Steelix to get hit by a flamethrower from this Scovillain, so he's opting to swap it out into Tyranitar immediately.
And Steelix gonna go for Dire Claw. I mean, that's one way that you can keep this Scovillain in check. You know that you're likely going to be falling to a Lumina Crash on the receiving end. Or if it ends up being the Tyranitar, that is all of a sudden immune to the Lumina Crash. Scovillain gets to go for the Flamethrower as well. Would have loved to be able to land that into the Mega Steelix.
That went pretty much as well as it could have. My opponent thought they needed to use a double up to clear my Steelix, but found themselves fully stopped by a Tyranitar switch. Now with Scovillain at such low HP, it is much easier for me to deal with it. And that's important because assuming the last Pokemon is Archaludon, Steelix will always beat it in a 1-against-1. I'm so close, but the game isn't over yet. I have to get rid of Scovillain before Archaludon gets out of control. It's not worth switching Sneasler out. It's already done its job. One question though, who's faster between Sneasler and Espathra? You would think it would be Espathra. After all, it has 3 speed boosts, while Unburden has given Sneasler what is effectively 2. But everything that I've seen out of this Espathra has led me to believe that it's actually quite slow. And so I decided to see if Sneasler can leave one last parting gift in this game. The turn begins and my hunch was right. Sneasler moves first, using Dire Claw into Espathra. There's no status, but what I wanted was the damage. Espathra retaliates with Lumina Crash, knocking out Sneasler. But Tyranitar is yet to move. Rock Slide connects on both and knocks out the Scovillain. And even though Tyranitar is burned by Spicy Spray, it's already done enough. Thanks to Dire Claw, this Espathra is in range of one more turn of sand damage. Meaning, everything comes down to my opponent's last Pokemon. They send it out, the unrevealed Pokemon. And it is exactly what I expected, Archaludon. I send out Sinistcha, understanding that Steelix is my most important Pokemon. Sand will end this turn, so this battle isn't a foregone conclusion yet. I can't just protect both my Pokemon and let the sand finish off Espathra, but I can put my opponent in a position where they have no good options. The turn begins and my opponent goes for a hard read, using Lumina Crash into my Tyranitar, who stays in. Knockoff KOs Espathra, as Archaludon launches a Dragon Pulse that doesn't even do half to Tyranitar. Last to move is Sinistcha, who uses Trick Room to twist the dimensions. My opponent thought that I would try and switch Tyranitar to Steelix so I could reset the sand and KO Espathra that way. But I realized that by using Knockoff, the only way for Espathra to survive would be to use Protect. If they protected, there would be no way for Archaludon to stop Trick Room from going up, which would then let me KO Espathra next turn. They might be able to stop Trick Room with a double up of Lumina Crash and Dragon Pulse, but that leaves Tyranitar free to knock off and KO Espathra. And even without Sand or Trick Room, I'm confident that Steelix would beat this Archaludon. In other words, I found the play that would win me the game no matter what my opponent did. Now, up 3-1, I just need to make sure that I bring it home. I switch Tyranitar to Steelix and Protect, blocking a Dragon Pulse. Now I can reset the sand. I switch Sinistcha to Tyranitar, but Archaludon protects, wasting a turn of Trick Room. But Steelix has everything it needs now. Sand and Trick Room converge around the brightest star on the field, swirling around it like the rocks orbiting its head, and Archaludon stands no chance. It's time to end this battle.
It's
Oh,
not
it's
knock
just
it out.
one
You just
hit.
get it immediately.
Okay, well, that's one way to do it. Their Archaludon is down, and Wolf Glick undefeated for day 1 of the Indianapolis Regional Championships.
And so I finished the day at the very first Pokemon Champions tournament undefeated, and I did it with Mega Steelix. Making it to day 2 with room to spare means I'm very likely to have qualified for the World Championships, but I won't know for sure until I see my final standing. There's 4 more games tomorrow, and if I win 2 of them, I will probably make it to the top cut, the final phase of the tournament. Before that though, I need a break from thinking about Pokemon and I need some food. I am famished. My friends and I head to one of the few restaurants we haven't been to before in Indianapolis, and then back home for an early bedtime. I'm so wiped, I fall asleep almost immediately, feeling accomplished with what I was able to do today. But the tournament isn't over, not by a long shot, and I wake up the next morning with the knowledge that if I don't lock in, I will very quickly find myself in hot water. We head to the venue, and when the pairing goes up, I realize there's not going to be any easing into this day, because my first opponent of the day is none other than Joshua Lorsey. Lorsey is a longtime veteran of the competitive scene, and has had a number of extremely strong performances over the course of his career. He's also a close friend of mine, and one of the best people I know. As a fun fact, the necklace that I'm wearing at this event was a gift that he got me. However, there is a problem with Joshua Lorsey, and that's the fact that he is an exceptional Pokemon player. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, but here he's my opponent. Without any warm-up, this is going to be tough. This battle will be on the side stream, which means there's no commentary, but you can see the actual match itself rather than our recreations for any key turns. This also means that you can see the immediate mess that I find myself in. I lead with Steelix and Tyranitar, a lead intending to punish a Floette lead. To my shock, Lorcy leads with Delphox and Sneasler, two Pokemon threatening 2 KOs on both of my Pokemon. It's pretty much a worst case scenario. I decide to try and get cheeky. Maybe Lorcy won't realize that Steelix has Sturdy, and I can sneak a surprise KO on Sneasler in, but Lorcy makes the hard read, ignoring my Tyranitar who protects, and doubling Steelix with both Heat Wave and Close Combat, knocking it out immediately. I send out Talonflame. I'm threatening Brave Bird on this turn and this turn alone, because afterwards the sand will break my Gale Wings. Lorcy switches Delphox into Incineroar, dropping the attack of both of my Pokemon as he protects Sneasler, blocking Brave Bird. Tyranitar Rock Slide hits the Incineroar, but doesn't even do half of its health. I can only get back into this game with a read, and I go for one, switching Tyranitar to Sinistcha, healing my Talonflame back to full HP, and reactivating Gale Wings. But Lorcy calls it, going for Fake Out to stop my Brave Bird and breaking Gale Wings once more. I need Sneasler gone. It's the single biggest threat against my Tyranitar. But Lorcy knows how eager I am to get rid of it, and he launches a Dire Claw, dropping Talonflame to red HP. Talonflame retaliates with a Brave Bird, but knocks itself out to the recoil, as Incineroar uses Parting Shot, dropping Sinistcha's special attack for the rest of the game. I Trick Room, twisting the dimensions, but I have a major problem. I have only 2 Pokemon left, while Lorcy still has Incineroar. The first issue with this is apparent, as I'm forced into Tyranitar. Josh can send out Incineroar. This drops my Tyranitar's attack, and I can't get rid of this by switching out. The second problem is somehow even worse. Sinistcha has nothing to do here. That means that Incineroar can use Fake Out to stop Tyranitar, while Machagacha does basically nothing, leaving Delphox free to set up a substitute that Sinistcha cannot break. Somehow, things just keep getting worse, as the Sandstorm ends, removing another source of damage from my side of the field, and causing Tyranitar to lose the 50% special defense buff it was enjoying. The only good thing here is that Tyranitar is hard for Josh to remove. He protects Delphox as I Rage Powder, trying to redirect a Parting Shot, and I get it right, as Incineroar switches out for Basculegion. Rock Slide connects, and crucially breaks the Focus Sash on Basculegion, putting it in range of knockoff. This was a good turn, but Tyranitar still has to win what is effectively a 3 versus 1 at -1 attack with another Intimidate waiting in the wings. It's a tall task to say the least, and doing it begins with getting this read correct. I have to call whether or not Basculegion is going to switch out. The turn begins and Basculegion switches, but I called it correctly. Incineroar comes back in, providing another Intimidate, as Sinistcha protects. Tyranitar Rock Slides, breaking Delphox's substitute and effectively tickling Incineroar. Heatwave connects, but it doesn't even do a quarter. Now though, Trick Room is ending, and we're in the same spot as before. Fake Out can stop Tyranitar from moving, and Sinistcha can't do anything, and this leaves Delphox free to go for a substitute. This time though, Lorcy chooses to Heat Wave, which misses Sinistcha, a huge stroke of good luck, keeping my Sinistcha at full HP. But Incineroar has a move that I forgot about, and it reveals it here, Helping Hand. Sinistcha protects, but Heat Wave lands true. And with the 50% damage buff that Incineroar provided, it does almost half of Tyranitar's remaining HP. Tyranitar shows off a move that it hasn't used all set, Dragon Dance. I return to -1 attack, but I now have +1 speed. And now there is a question. At +1 speed, my Tyranitar hits 202 speed stat. Delphox's maximum speed stat is 205, meaning it would still be faster than my Tyranitar. However, most Delphox hang out at 201 speed, which is one above Aerodactyl and Mega Gengar, as there aren't that many other Pokemon between 200 and 205. So the question becomes, how fast is Lorcy's Delphox? Could it be slower than my Tyranitar? It's a very important question, but it isn't one that affects my play. I can only win if I am faster. Lorcy goes for Helping Hand once more, but before Delphox can move, Tyranitar launches a Rock Slide. It knocks out Delphox, but Incineroar survives with just 6 HP, but only for a moment. Sinistcha finishes the turn with Machagacha, and I suddenly find myself up 2 against 1. Lorcy sent out Basculegion, but because Focus Sash was broken earlier, I have a safe win. Lorcy knows this and forfeits, and somehow I win game 1. Well, it wasn't clean, but I managed to turn it around. My goal now is to somehow have game 2 go at least a little bit cleaner. That starts by changing up my leads. I'll go with Steelix and Talonflame this time. Unfortunately, Josh also changed it up, and Incineroar and Sneasler gives him the edge. Both these Pokemon have fake out pressure, but I can defuse that by protecting both of my Pokemon. Josh makes the safe play this time, probably because I played so aggressively last game. And so the second turn looks the same as the first, but this time there's no fake out. I Mega Evolve as Sneasler protects itself. Brave Bird is blocked as Incineroar uses Parting Shot, dropping Talonflame to -2 and bringing out Basculegion. Steelix goes for high horsepower, but it misses, crucially leaving this Basculegion at full HP with the Focus Sash still intact. Despite this battle starting off better, I'm somehow behind again. I switch Steelix out. I know I need it later to beat Floette if it's waiting in the wings. Talonflame Brave Bird connects onto Sneasler, but it survives with just 5 HP. Thanks to the double attack drops. Close Combat fails into my Sinistcha switch, but Liquidation knocks out Talonflame, putting me behind once again. I send out Tyranitar to replace my knocked out Talonflame. The good news is that the sand will take care of the Sneasler for me. Josh switches Basculegion out, back into Incineroar. I Rage Powder, redirecting a Close Combat, and Dragon Dance, canceling out the attack drop that my Tyranitar just received and boosting its speed. The sand finishes off Sneasler, evening the Pokemon count back out. But this time, Lorcy's final Pokemon is different. It's Floette. It can rip through Tyranitar and Sinistcha, so I need to beat it using Steelix. But in order to do that, I need to get through Incineroar. I Rock Slide, but it misses Incineroar. As compensation, it flinches Floette, but Flare Blitz lands true and drops Sinistcha to low HP. The good news is that I'm able to get Trick Room up, meaning that my Steelix will have the speed advantage whenever it comes out. But how can I get it out safely? If Josh predicts which slot it's coming in for, he can Flare Blitz or Parting Shot. And I realize there's no safe way for me to get Steelix in, but there is a way I can cover for it if I get the call wrong. If I switch Sinistcha out, I'll have access to Hospitality if I take too much damage on the way in. So I go for it, but Lorcy's move isn't what I expected. He launches a Helping Hand and Dazzling Gleam, and I didn't protect Tyranitar, but I survive. Rock Slide misses again, but this time it's onto Floette. And I realize that, for the first time all set, I'm the one in the driver's seat. Josh switches Incineroar out, but I don't take the bait. And for what feels like the first time all set, perfectly predict what Lorcy wants to do. Even though it could have protected, I use Heavy Slam into Floette, who falls. Tyranitar follows up with a knockoff aimed at Incineroar, who is now Basculegion, dropping it to Focus Sash, where the final turn of sand damage finishes it off. Up 3 against 1 with Trick Room still active, Josh forfeits, and I win game 2 and round 9 of the tournament, putting me at a record of 9-0 overall. There's 3 rounds left before Top Cut, and normally winning one of them would get me in for sure. But as I wrap up my match with Josh, my friends let me know that they've run the numbers. And some people with only 2 losses will miss Top Cut due to the specific size of this tournament. So even though I'm one of only 2 players left who are still undefeated, I'm not out of the woods yet. And the pressure couldn't be much higher, because since my next round is guaranteed to be against the other undefeated player, they're putting us on the main stream. My opponent is a team that, on the one hand, isn't too similar to anything that I've seen before. It has Mega Frostlass and Corviknight, 2 Pokemon that are strong but not the most popular. But looking at the other members of this team, I'm reminded of something. Another popular team. A team that uses Whimsicott, Glimmora, Garchomp, a weather-setting Mega Evolution that happens to be weak to Tyranitar, and a Steel type. And I realized that the game plan that I normally use to beat that team should work against this one. But I need to warn you, my game plan is gonna look a little bit silly. I just ask that you trust the process here, okay? The battle begins with my Tyranitar and Rotom against their Whimsicott and Glimmora. The exact lead that I expected. And the turn 1 might look bad. After all, my Rotom takes a ton of damage and has its special attack dropped, while I don't do any damage in exchange. But this is all according to plan, because I not only set up a Dragon Dance, I also set up Light Screen. I switch Rotom out, sending out Sneasler, but I don't go on the offensive. Instead, I Dragon Dance a second time. Super effective Moonblast and Earth Power both land into Tyranitar, but thanks to the Light Screen, I only lose half of my health. You would think now is the time to attack, with doubled attack and speed, but you would be wrong.
Plenty of offense here, forcing the Protect out of the Whimsicott, so Evan has to protect that Pokemon. really wants to save both of these Pokemon. Of course, the double protect, if they fake out, really threatening here from Wolf. But a double protect and a fake out leaves an opportunity for a third Dragon Dance, at which point even Tailwind is not going to outspeed this Tyranitar.
I know it looks greedy. I know it looks like I'm just joking around, but I'm not. See, Whimsicott has Tailwind, which will double the speeds of all Pokemon on my opponent's side of the field. What this means is that the speed boost a Dragon Dance or 2 Dragon Dances gives me will be totally nullified, and I'll need to stall the Tailwind in order to win. But things change after 3 Dragon Dances. If I can get 3 set up, I'll outspeed even this Whimsicott and Garchomp inside of Tailwind. My game plan from the very beginning was to use Light Screen, Fake Out, and my unrevealed Sinistcha to get 3 boosts before I attack. Now, finally, I have everything I need. I switch Sneasler out into Sinistcha, healing Tyranitar back up. Tailwind goes up, but Tyranitar is still the next to move, dropping Glimmora to Focus Sash and Whimsicott into range of the sand. This is a very bulky Whimsicott. I have never seen one survive before. I actually didn't even know it was possible. Glimmora does not flinch and retaliates with Earth Power, but Light Screen is still active and it barely does 25%. Lastly, the sand finishes the job, knocking out Whimsicott. I'm in the lead 4 against 3, and Tyranitar is still completely unchecked. My opponent sends out Garchomp, normally a great Pokemon to check Tyranitar in Tailwind. At +3 though, there's no chance they survive a knockoff. But unfortunately, Tyranitar doesn't stay at +3. My opponent switches Glimmora to Incineroar, dropping Tyranitar back down to +2. And this allows Garchomp to survive the knockoff, something that is only possible with tons of points in HP, as well as some points in defense, as well as a lucky roll probably. This survival allows Garchomp to ignore my Rage Powder and use Earthquake to knock out Tyranitar, though it also crits their own Incineroar as the Sandstorm ends. It's 3 against 3, but
yeah, Evan has a total of 7 hit points across his 3 Pokemon right now.
Tyranitar is down, but it more than did its job. Garchomp protects, but Fake Out KOs Incineroar as Trick Room is set up. Sinistcha lands Machagacha on both Pokemon.
Huge damage from the Machagacha, picks up the final 4 hit points on Evan's field, and that means that Wolf will take game 1. We are headed into game 2.
That went pretty much exactly according to plan, but now I have a decision to make. The issue is with the leads. I can just lead Tyranitar and Rotom again, but this makes the turn 1 a bit more volatile now that I've played my hand. If I make the same play that I did in game 1, using Dragon Dance and Light Screen, my opponent can double attack my Tyranitar before I set Light Screen up, doing way more damage and making it much harder to set up for 3 Dragon Dances. I can protect Tyranitar, but then they can double into Rotom. And if I take a bunch of damage on Rotom in exchange for only Light Screen, it isn't a very good trade. So I decided to change it up. I'll prioritize setting Light Screen up before Tyranitar hits the field this time around. And so game 2, my leads are Sneasler and Rotom, facing off against Glimmora and Whimsicott. My opponent sets Tailwind and uses Earth Power into my Sneasler, but thanks to all my bulk, I survive. Dire Claw retaliates, knocking out Whimsicott, and Rotom lands a Hydro Pump, dropping Glimmora to Focus Sash. In exchange for Tailwind and most of Sneasler's health, I've taken almost half of my opponent's total HP. A good trade, right? Well, it's not so simple, because Garchomp hits the field. Rock Slide knocks out my Sneasler, something I honestly didn't expect given how much bulk I'm running, and Sludge Bomb poisons my Rotom. This would all be okay, except that Rotom flinches. And just like that, my entire turn is wasted without any progress made. I send out Sinistcha, healing Rotom a little. The good news is that Sinistcha is strong here, as Machagacha can not only KO Glimmora, but also potentially burn Garchomp. The issue is that my opponent has not yet revealed their final Pokemon, and I realize it might be Corviknight. And if it is, I cannot afford to let Rotom go down yet. And so I switch Rotom out, sending out Tyranitar. My opponent goes for another Rock Slide as Sludge Bomb hits Tyranitar and poisons again. This is a massive problem. My Dragon Dance game plan is basically off the table now. Machagacha thankfully connects on both foes, knocking out Glimmora, but Garchomp does not get burnt. My opponent now sends out their final Pokemon, Corviknight, just like I feared. If I'm going to win this game, I have got to get a call right. I predict Garchomp to go for a ground move into my Tyranitar, and I switch Rotom in with the hope of taking no damage. They do go for Earthquake, and Corviknight goes for a bulk up, and that means Sinistcha is free to go for another Machagacha. It hits both, and it burns Corviknight. That's a huge stroke of good luck. If I can just deal with this Garchomp, I might be able to win now. But the issue is the poisons. Between the sand and the poison, Rotom is just taking so much damage. And Tyranitar is on a timer too. Corviknight is not yet in range of Thunderbolt, and Corviknight has recovery. I decide to take a gamble. The Rage Powder is obvious, so maybe my opponent will go for Rock Slide. I think my best chance of winning is to land both Thunderbolt and Machagacha this turn. But Garchomp doesn't go for Rock Slide, it goes for Dragon Claw. And despite my Rotom having tons of physical bulk, it goes down. Most likely an unfortunate roll. Corviknight goes for a second bulk up as Machagacha misses Garchomp. And after this turn, I don't see any way through the Corviknight. I send it to Tyranitar and Protect, taking Earthquake and a boosted Brave Bird with Sinistcha, who survives and sets up Trick Room. I Mega Evolve, going for a desperate Hail Mary. I protect Sinistcha as Corviknight goes for Roost, and Knock Off KOs the Garchomp from over half HP. Now I am up 2 against 1, but this Corviknight has double defenses and a quadruple resistance to grass. With full HP on Corviknight and the poison on Tyranitar, the only hope I have is for the most high roll critical hit in history.
Wolf flick here. Corviknight goes for the Brave Bird. Wolf does not get the double protect on a Sinistcha, so that Pokemon will go down. It's all going to come down to if this Tyranitar can swing hard enough with the knockoff, get a critical hit through the bulk up boost, and take out this Pokemon. And just about does, but it is not enough damage.
Well, I did get the crit, but it was too little too late. With just 3 HP left on Tyranitar, my own Trick Room turns against me. Corviknight knocks out Tyranitar with Body Press, and I lose game 2. And now, the path forward isn't so clear. On the one hand, I do feel like I got pretty unlucky. Both Sludge Bomb Poisons and the Rock Slide Flinch had a major impact. On the other hand, the turn 1 was near perfect for me, and I still lost. And that seems like a bad omen. Even worse, I showed a new lead in game 2 that matched up well into Whimsicott and Glimmora. Now that my opponent has seen it, will they change their leads up? Should I go back to Tyranitar and Rotom? I don't think so. In the few minutes that I have between games, I assessed that the issue was that I actually played too aggressively, taking knockouts too quickly. The goal in this matchup is to win with Dragon Dance Tyranitar. That means it may actually be better to set Light Screen and leave the special attackers alive on the field rather than knocking them out and letting Garchomp have free reign. So, game 3, I'm running it back with Sneasler and Rotom. But my hunch was right. My opponent has changed things up, and it's Garchomp and Glimmora in the lead. Offensively, this is much scarier, but there's a pretty major upside for me from this lead too. Garchomp is one of the biggest threats to Tyranitar. If I can burn it...
We do see the spiky shield, so maybe it'll be the Earthquake. We'll have to see if Wolf calls this or not.
That's a Protect coming out from the Glimmora. Sneasler going on the offensive, connects with Garchomp with the Dire Claw, the potential for a status effect. There's the Earthquake coming out from Garchomp. Does not deal damage to either the Rotom or the Glimmora thanks to the Spiky Shield, but here it connects onto Sneasler, picks up that KO. Now, what does this Rotom do? Is it going to try to go for a Light Screen? Is it going to try to go for a Will-O-Wisp? Or is it going to try to go for damage? Will-O-Wisp is the choice, and it does connect onto Garchomp.
I know that play looks weird, but the issue is, if I go for, let's say, Fake Out in Will-O-Wisp, and my opponent just switched in Whimsicott, I think I would be pretty far behind, if not just immediately screwed. Rough Skin means that my Sneasler can't survive an Earthquake, and I know it might look like I just traded Sneasler for a burn, but I actually think that's an acceptable trade here, because with Garchomp burnt, Tyranitar is now all clear to come in. It's time to dance, but I have to pay a price. Tyranitar Mega evolves, but Dragon Claw comes out and crits Rotom. Glimmora follows up with a Sludge Bomb into Rotom, which poisons again. Tyranitar gets its first Dragon Dance up, and Rotom sets up Light Screen. This is another turn where I didn't do any damage and I lost almost an entire Pokemon, but this time Tyranitar is boosting up. The question is, will it be enough? With just one boost, there is no way.
Again, but Tyranitar going to go for that second Dragon Dance, so unlikely Sinistcha in the back, and Wolf just committing to the win condition that Tyranitar is going to defeat all these Pokemon on its own.
Well, there's the Dragon Claw coming out onto Rotom. Rotom now will go down finally, but did a lot of work for Wolf. Here comes the Earth Power coming out from the Glimmora.
Another turn where I didn't do any damage, but Tyranitar is now up to 2 boosts. I do need to be careful though. Since I'm down to my final 2 Pokemon, there's no more healing for Tyranitar for the rest of the game. I've got to win this game with only the 2 Pokemon I have left. But here's the thing, I think Corviknight is waiting in the wings for my opponent, and I do not believe for a second that I'll KO it after just 2 Dragon Dances. I need a third, and so I grit my teeth and I let it rip one more time, hoping Tyranitar can hold out a little longer, and Garchomp goes for a Rock Slide, doing next to nothing to Tyranitar. Glimmora launches a Sludge Bomb into Sinistcha, which miraculously does not poison. and Sinistcha uses Matcha Gotcha, breaking the Focus Sash on Glimmora and dealing a bit more chip damage to Garchomp. Crucially, Tyranitar is still almost at full HP. And now, for the first time this game, I am finally ready. Glimmora uses Spiky Shield as I go for a Rock Slide, and even though Garchomp resists it, it still loses most of its health. Earthquake comes out, but Rotom's parting gift of the burn keeps Tyranitar from dropping below half health, and Matcha Gotcha ends the turn by connecting on Garchomp, leaving it with just 1 HP, which melts to the burn. 3 Pokemon left now, and my opponent sends out Corviknight. Now normally, bulk up, physically defensive Corviknight has a winning matchup against Tyranitar, but also normally, Tyranitar does not have 3 Dragon Dances set up. The crucial question here is it enough? Failing to KO Corviknight will leave it free to Brave Bird my Sinistcha, knocking it out and making this battle a 3 against 1. If that happens, Tyranitar can lose if it misses Rock Slide. If Corviknight falls, I'll have a much safer path to victory. This is it.
3 Dragon Dances.
Well, there's a Rage Powder coming out from the Sinistcha to protect the Tyranitar from a body press. Tyranitar is faster and no bulk ups. Corviknight, no bulk ups this time. That's a 1-hit KO.
And now you see why I needed 3 Dragon Dances, not just for Tailwind, but for Corviknight. Of course, this battle isn't over yet, because my opponent's final Pokemon is, for the first time, Frostlass. If I miss a Rock Slide, I could get frozen by Blizzard, giving my opponent a way back into this battle. I protect both my Pokemon, trying to scout for a Protect, but I don't get it. Rock Slide is 90% accurate on both my opponent's Pokemon. That's pretty good odds, especially considering both my opponent's Pokemon will go down to it. But I think I can do better. I Rage Powder and lock in the 100% accurate knockoff into Frostlass, removing the chance that I'll lose on a miss, and Frostlass goes down. My opponent knows Glimmora cannot do this on its own and forfeits. And with that, I become the last remaining undefeated player at the first official live event of Pokemon Champions. This also means I very likely will make top cut, but I know it's not guaranteed. In order to lock it in, I need 1 more win in the last 2 rounds, which is made more stressful because I swiftly lose the next round. I'm up against the Incineroar Sinistcha package, but this time it's paired with Dragon Dance Mega Gyarados. Not only does this mean that my opponent has double Intimidate, it also makes my Talonflame ineffective due to its poor Gyarados matchup. I put myself in a winning spot in game 1, but I miss Will-O-Wisp on the 1 turn that Gyarados is vulnerable, and I barely lose. Game 2 is a blowout. I decide to leave Talonflame behind in favor of Tyranitar, but this means that I can't break Sinistcha, and my opponent never gives me a clean shot at Gyarados. It's one of my fastest sets of the weekend, as I lose without taking a single game. I'm 10-1 now, and if I lose the last one, I could be eliminated from the tournament. I'm feeling the nerves kick in as I see that my next opponent has Mega Garchomp? Mega Garchomp gets clowned on a lot due to it being an inferior version of regular Garchomp in most cases. However, against Tyranitar specifically, it's not such a low tier pick. Just like Steelix, Mega Garchomp has the Sand Force ability, but unlike Steelix, it has base 170 attack, 45 more points than my Steel Snake, and I'm flustered. I lead Tyranitar in game 1 because this team also has Mega Charizard, and I don't want to get mixed up, but Stomping Tantrum from the Mega Shark KOs my Tyranitar on the first turn. I forget my opponent is Farigiraf and I launch a Fake Out turn 2 as I switch in Farigiraf and knock out my Sneasler. And now, left with only Sinistcha and Rotom, I lose swiftly. I've now lost 3 games in a row, and losing a 4th could mean my tournament is over. But I take a deep breath and focus. In the second game, I make sure to burn Garchomp early, and I don't just sacrifice my Pokemon for no good reason. By knocking out the Incineroar early, I'm able to get some breathing room for my Tyranitar and Sneasler, and I slowly march towards a game 2 win. This set comes down to game 3. And I have a big decision I have to make. In both games, my opponent and I brought the exact same Pokemon. They went with Incineroar, Garchomp, Sylveon, and Farigiraf, while I went with Tyranitar, Rotom, Sneasler, and Sinistcha. If you look at this matchup, you may notice that my Tyranitar is not especially good here, but I felt pressured to bring it in case my opponent brought their Mega Charizard Y. Now, however, I realized something. I brought Tyranitar game 1 and got completely blown up, but in game 2, I brought it again anyway, and I won. My opponent probably thinks I'm going to bring it regardless. And if that's what they think, they should once again make Garchomp their primary Mega and leave Charizard behind. And so, with my tournament fate potentially hanging in the balance, I decide to take an enormous risk and leave Tyranitar behind for Steelix. If my opponent brings Charizard, there is no amount of good play that will save me. But if my hunch is correct, but I was wrong. My opponent has switched up their Pokemon, but the new Pokemon they're bringing isn't Charizard, it's Aerodactyl. And just like last game, I'm able to burn Garchomp early. I prioritize getting Trick Room up, and my opponent reels in shock as I reveal that this time I've got Steelix. I get to a position where everything is in range of Heavy Slam except for the Incineroar on the board. Trick Room is up, but only for one more turn. The obvious play here is to high horsepower Incineroar for the knockout. But if my opponent reads it, they can switch to Aerodactyl and nullify the attack. My opponent has been playing well all set, and so I decide to take the gamble that they'll make the switch. Incineroar goes to Aerodactyl as I ignore it, and knock out Sylveon with Heavy Slam, landing a Machagacha on Aerodactyl. With Garchomp burned and the Pokemon advantage, I'm able to use Steelix's massive bulk to get me across the finish line. I win Game 3 and Round 12, and finish the second phase of the tournament with 11 wins and only 1 loss. This means that I am guaranteed to advance to Top Cut. But while at a normal tournament, this record would earn me a bye through the first round, guaranteeing me a spot in the top 8, due to the size of this event, nobody is getting a bye. And just like my friends predicted, 2 players with a record of 10 wins and 2 losses actually missed Top Cut. There's no time to rest. Top 16 is starting now. I'm up against a team that's a hybrid of a good matchup and a bad one. The good matchup is Tyranitar and Excadrill, 2 Pokemon that my team is adept at handling. The bad matchup is the remaining 4 Pokemon: Incineroar, Sinistcha, Floette, and Rotom Wash. Unfortunately, these are the 4 Pokemon my opponent will bring to every single game. But in Game 1, my plan works. I use Talonflame to set up, and then KO Incineroar. With Incineroar down, I'm able to position Steelix. And despite an unfortunate Machagacha burn that prevents me from taking the KO on Floette, I'm able to eventually win the game. Game 2 does not go as smoothly. I mean, everything starts out perfectly fine at first. I get some damage down on Floette, and eventually I get my Talonflame in, and I Swords Dance twice, with Incineroar canceling out one of the 2 with 2 rounds of Intimidate. I think I have a guaranteed win, but their Incineroar just barely survives the +2 Brave Bird, and I knock myself out to the recoil. Even though Floette is down, their Sinistcha has Life Dew, and I can't break through Incineroar, Rotom, and Sinistcha with just my lone Sinistcha left, even though everything is super low HP. I lose Game 2. At this point, a loss means I'm eliminated from the tournament. The pressure is on. There have been so many Game 3s, so many close calls, and I can feel that it's all adding up. But I also know that I can win this game. I just need to play a little bit more carefully with my Talonflame. Game 3 is slow. We end up in this super awkward mid-game with their Sinistcha and Rotom staring down my Sinistcha and Sneasler. I let my Sneasler get burnt foolishly before realizing as long as I click Rage Powder, neither of these Pokemon can damage my Talonflame. I get Talonflame in and Swords Dance. Then I Swords Dance again, and then a 3rd time. 3 turns, 3 dances. And although Incineroar has been doing its best, it's losing this race. My opponent switches Rotom in, but Brave Bird knocks it out. My opponent repositions, gets a Calm Mind up on Floette, but I get a crucial call correct, and Brave Bird knocks out Floette. Left with only Incineroar and Sinistcha against my still boosted Talonflame, I use my own Sinistcha to keep my bird alive and win Game 3. I'm advancing to the top 8, where I'll be facing off against a rather unusual dual Mega team, using Mega Dragonite and Mega Frostlass. Mega Dragonite has primarily been used on rain teams, but this one forgoes the powerful flying type move Hurricane for the coverage moves of Flamethrower and Thunderbolt. Other than the Mega evolutions, this team is full of the usual suspects, though since I've never seen them paired with these Megas, I'm not so confident that I know what to do here. I think that if I can get my Tyranitar online, I can win this game. It is good into both Mega evolutions at the very least. Of course, I need to deal with the threats first, and so I decide to lead with Rotom and Sneasler, as my opponent sends out Dragonite and their own Sneasler. One thing I haven't highlighted very much yet is the fact that this tournament is played with open natures, a new addition to our open team sheet format. Up until this point, every Sneasler that I've played against has had an attack boosting nature, meaning I was positive that my Sneasler was faster. This Sneasler, however, has a speed boosting nature, and so I assume that it's faster than mine. But my opponent doesn't give me a chance to find out, at least not on turn 1. After Dragonite Mega evolves, my Sneasler lands a Fake Out, stopping it from moving and breaking Multiscale. Their Sneasler retaliates with a close combat, doing over half of my Rotom's HP. This lets Rotom land a Will-O-Wisp, weakening Sneasler for the rest of the game. Overall, I would say that this was a pretty good turn. I switched Sneasler into Sinistcha, healing my Rotom back. Dire Claw hits my Sinistcha, but doesn't get a status effect. And even though Dragonite goes for a Dragon Pulse, it barely doesn't KO Rotom thanks to Hospitality. This survival is massive, because it lets me set up Light Screen, reducing the damage from Dragonite for the next 5 turns. I switch Sinistcha out into Tyranitar, setting up the sand. I take a Dire Claw and Flamethrower, barely taking any damage, and that leaves my Rotom free to go for a Thunderbolt, dropping Sneasler below half health. I can't set up Tyranitar yet. I'm too vulnerable to Sneasler. My opponent switches Dragonite to Garchomp as Tyranitar protects and blocks a close combat. This lets my Rotom's Thunderbolt KO Sneasler, putting me in the lead 4 against 3. Basculegion hits the field, replacing the fallen Weasel. And I realize something. With this Basculegion being adamant nature, it's guaranteed to be slower than my Tyranitar. That means I can knock it out in one hit with Knockoff. And realizing this, I also realize that my opponent cannot let it happen. They have to either protect Basculegion or go for an Aqua Jet and try and KO Tyranitar with a double up. And so,
in a really difficult position now. He's gonna have to switch the Tyranitar out of battle. Can't start setting up yet.
Well, the obvious switch here is Sinistcha to bait out any type of water type attacks from that Basculegion or ground types from the Garchomp. Not taking the bait, instead going on the offensive against the Rotom. Again, a second hospitality, allowing the Rotom to survive an extra turn on the field. This Rotom is getting so much value. This Sinistcha is getting so much value, and a second Will-O-Wisp connects onto the Garchomp.
okay, well, I may have overthought that one a little bit. But the good news is I burned the Garchomp. Now Tyranitar is looking incredibly favored, because I can always KO this Basculegion with Knockoff later. I protect Sinistcha as Garchomp goes for a Rock Slide, and Rotom survives. Basculegion goes for a Last Respects into the Protect, letting my Rotom land a Hydro Pump into Garchomp. Sand finally KOs Rotom, but it has more than done its job. I send out Tyranitar as my light screen ends. I switch Sinistcha out into Sneasler, and disaster strikes. The one way I can lose this game. Garchomp goes for Rock Slide, hits Tyranitar and flinches it. Now, Knockoff fails to connect. With its extra life, Basculegion uses Last Respects into my Sneasler, but it survives thanks to all of the bulk. Had that been Wave Crash into Tyranitar, I would have lost the game for sure. Thankfully, I'm still in it. I fake out Garchomp, stopping it from going for another Rock Slide, but Basculegion Aqua Jet finishes off my Sneasler. Tyranitar Knockoff lands true this time, KOing Basculegion and sending us into a 2 against 2 endgame, as Sinistcha and Dragonite re-enter the field. I feel like I'm still winning this position, because Tyranitar will survive an Earthquake thanks to the burn, but Garchomp uses Rock Slide and hits both of my Pokemon. Dragonite follows up with a Flamethrower, and to my shock, it KOs my Sinistcha. Worst of all, Tyranitar flinches again, preventing me from going for a Dragon Dance that would allow me to outspeed. Suddenly, I'm down 1 against 2. I need Tyranitar to somehow turn this around. My opponent goes all in on damage, forgoing the chance of a flinch using Earthquake and Dragon Pulse, but Tyranitar barely survives, and finally pulls off its dance. I'm now faster than both of my opponent's Pokemon, but will Rock Slide KO? Will it even connect? I have no other option. I lock in my move and hold my breath.
Slide. Now it is Tyranitar who Rock Slides. Garchomp goes down and Dragonite goes down. The Dragon Dance takes out the Dragon, and Tyranitar gives Wolf a victory in game 1.
Well, that was a little too close for comfort, huh? If one more thing had gone wrong, I think the battle would have been lost for sure. Note to self, in game 2, maybe I'll try and prioritize Dragon Dance with Tyranitar earlier, so I can hopefully avoid those Rock Slide flinches. I decided to mix up my lead, starting with Tyranitar and Talonflame this time. My idea is that Talonflame can use Brave Bird to knock out Sneasler, allowing Tyranitar to Dragon Dance safely. Of course, the problem is that this turn, Sneasler could use Fake Out, and so I protect both of my Pokemon. But it was the wrong play. As Dragonite switches to Garchomp, I wasted a chance to Dragon Dance. Sneasler switches out, bringing Kingambit in to take the Brave Bird. Unfortunately, that's all Talonflame can do, as Rock Slide knocks it out in return. Thankfully, Tyranitar doesn't flinch this time and gets a Dragon Dance up early. Garchomp protects and blocks a knockoff, but close combat KOs Kingambit, evening the Pokemon count with 3 left apiece. My opponent sends out their own Sneasler. The good news is that neither of these Pokemon threaten my Sinistcha. I protect Tyranitar and bring Sinistcha in, who only takes a Dragon Claw. Now I can Rage Powder as Tyranitar goes for Knockoff, dropping Garchomp to red HP. Shockingly, the next Pokemon to move is Garchomp. It's faster than their Sneasler. That means their Sneasler is guaranteed to be slower than mine. That could be handy moving forward. Sand does unfortunately end, but Tyranitar is still a monster threat. I protect Tyranitar, but Dragon Claw drops Sinistcha to dangerously low health. Thankfully, my opponent went for close combat, which is blocked, and that lets me KO Garchomp with Matcha Gotcha. I'm up 3 against 2 as Dragonite re-enters the field. Rage Powder and Rock Slide seems like a pretty safe move, and so I lock it in. but total disaster strikes. Dragonite protects, which would be fine, except that Rock Slide misses Sneasler. That's fine, except that Dire Claw crits, which is also fine, except that it also rolls the 10% chance to sleep. Had the Rock Slide not missed, I'd be threatening a KO on their Sneasler. Had it not slept, I could make the same play again this turn. Now it's a total disaster. I decide to protect, hoping to sacrifice Sinistra for a switch into my Sneasler, and my opponent calls it out. They use close combat into their own Dragonite, breaking their multiscale but activating their own Unburden. And now their Sneasler is faster than my Tyranitar, the one thing that I had to avoid. Dragonite KOs Sinistra, eliminating the chance for a one-turn wake-up, bailing me out. And with these 2 turns going the way that they did, the game is now over. Their Sneasler can KO my Tyranitar before I can move, and there's nothing I can do about it. Except, well, there's one thing that I can try. My opponent protects both of their Pokemon to waste the Fake Out turn. Fake Out is blocked and I Dragon Dance, which looks flashy, but to be honest, is completely pointless. Even with 2 boosts, I'm still way too slow to handle their Sneasler. But now I have a chance, a 20% chance to win this game. I can Dire Claw their Sneasler, and if I roll Paralysis or Sleep, my Tyranitar will have a shot to win this game. It's not much, but it's all I have now.
Seen one Dire Claw already.
Well, there is a Protect coming out from the Mega Tyranitar on Wolf's side. Close combat coming out from Sneasler from Alex into the Protect. No damage here. There's the Dire Claw onto the opposing Sneasler. Does Wolf get one of the 2 rolls he needs? He does! The Paralysis connects onto the Sneasler from the Dire Claw. Dragon Pulse comes through from Dragonite. Not enough to pick up the KO onto Sneasler. And this is a disaster for Alex. If Tyranitar can land these Rock Slides, it's over.
The opposing Sneasler freed up to try and dish out some damage now.
Yeah, everything changes with each of those Dire Claws. Dragonite goes down to the Rock Slide. Sneasler takes a large amount of damage, has a very low chance of actually being able to attack through the flinch and the paralysis, but may not even get a chance because Wolf Sneasler goes first, picks up the KO. Wolf Glick advances to your semifinals.
Well, I'm not complaining. Obviously, it was lucky to get the Dire Claw roll, but given that I was only in that position in the first place from some Dire Claw shenanigans, I don't feel bad about it. The tournament has been so hectic. I've had such little time to breathe, which is why, for the first time, I realize I've qualified for Worlds. Making top 8 locked it in, but as I take a few moments to breathe before the semifinals, it hits me. Despite taking nearly half of the season up to this point off, and only attending 4 major events, I did it. And I did it with Mega Steelix, no less. But now is not the time to get sentimental. This tournament isn't over yet. My next opponent has a really terrifying team. At first glance, it seems like it would be a good matchup, because they have Tyranitar, who generally I like playing against. However, if we look a little bit deeper, we start to see some issues. Hisuian Arcanine is a huge problem, with Focus Sash and Rock Head giving it actual staying power, and moves like Head Smash and Flare Blitz doing tons of damage. Corviknight and Garchomp both really encourage me to use Rotom, who can be hard to protect here given all the offense. And Mega Frostlass can really mess with my squad if I don't protect my Tyranitar well. It's certainly not a terrible matchup, but it doesn't look very easy either. I think my plan in Game 1 has to be to get my Tyranitar boosted. After a Dragon Dance, I can fight against these Pokemon way better, especially Mega Frostlass. The question is, how do I find the time to dance in the face of such powerful offensive threats? Game 1 begins with my Sneasler and Rotom against Arcanine and Frostlass. I go for Fake Out, not really expecting anything, but to my surprise, it works. Focus Sash is broken. Frostlass Mega Evolves and goes for Blizzard, doing over half to Sneasler, but I'm able to get Light Screen set up in return. Overall, I think that was a pretty good turn. I switch Rotom out into Tyranitar, gaining control over the weather, and I protect my Sneasler, trying to bait out a Protect from Arcanine. To my shock, there's no Protect, and not only does the 70% accurate Blizzard land in the sand, but the 80% accurate Head Smash targeted my Tyranitar too and connects, dropping me to red HP. My most important Pokemon is almost knocked out, and all I've done in exchange is break a Focus Sash. That cannot be good. I need to make a play here to get back into this game. I predict the next turn perfectly. I switch Sneasler out into Sinistra, healing Tyranitar before I Mega Evolve. And Arcanine goes for an extreme speed, doing nothing to my Ghost-type Sinistra. Frostlass launches a Rock-type Weather Ball, but thanks to the healing, Tyranitar survives. And I Dragon Dance, suddenly threatening a KO on both of my opponent's Pokemon.
I'd like to say I can't believe that Wolf was willing to Dragon Dance in front of those Pokemon, but at this point, I am. Very bold play by Wolf where he was getting me pinned there, and I think a head smash into that slot likely would have sent us right into game 2. Instead, calls that no, there's no way you think I'm going to leave this Tyranitar open, despite the low HP, at least healing up enough that that Weather Ball wasn't able to knock it out, though I think it would have survived anyway. But no longer in extreme speed range, which I think would have been a real threat without the hospitality, and suddenly threatening a quick Rock Slide that could have knocked out both of these Pokemon. So the Hydreigon going to enter battle, though I don't know if it would be especially excited about taking one of those attacks either.
Yeah, Hydreigon, another Pokemon that is the Steelix kind of forces Michael to bring, because if you don't bring that Pokemon, then you might just end up walled by Steelix, but it does not have a great matchup into this particular setup here. Those Rock Slides are hurting.
This turn might not look super flashy, but it ends up being essential. By switching Sinistcha to Sneasler, not only do I gain Fake Out, but I also reset Hospitality, keeping the option open for the future. While my opponent was forced to play defensively by switching out Frostlass, I was able to do over half to their Hydreigon, meaning that now not 2, but 3 of their Pokemon are heavily threatened by Rock Slide. If I can navigate this next turn correctly, I think I'll be in a spot where I can win. But Choice Scarf Hydreigon outspeeds my Tyranitar. How should I handle it? The obvious move here is to fake out Hydreigon and go for a Rock Slide, which should net me both KOs. However, Arcanine can go for extreme speed and take out my Sneasler, making this a 2-for-1 trade, which is good, but I think that I can do better. I switch Sneasler to Sinistcha, healing Tyranitar again. As I suspected, extreme speed was aimed at that slot and does nothing to Sinistcha. And even though Hydreigon does go for a super effective Earth Power, between the sand and the light screen, it barely damages Tyranitar. Rock Slide lands true, and suddenly I'm up 4 Pokemon left to 2. My opponent sends out their final 2 Pokemon, Mega Frostlass and Tyranitar. The sand is staying up. This is a big deal, as in the snow, I'm not sure that boosted Rock Slide would KO, but in the sand without the snow defense boost, I should be all clear. I protect both of my Pokemon, scouting for a Protect, and Frostlass protects. Now I can go for a knockoff into Frostlass, not needing to risk a missed Rock Slide, and my opponent knows it. They forfeit and I win game 1. One more win and I'm going to the finals. But let's not get ahead of myself, right? The early game definitely didn't go my way there, and it was only with a really risky Dragon Dance in the mid game that I was able to turn things around. There's also another thing to consider, put eloquently by Evan and Scott, the casters.
Speaking of Steelix, by the way, did Wolf kind of just trick us all yesterday? Like, did he deliberately have this Steelix, really like a highly Steelix-oriented strategy, knowing that everybody was going to watch him at the end of Swift? So then, like, well, we keep having these team previews where I'm sure everyone is really afraid of the specter of the Steelix that we haven't seen in almost 24 hours.
They're right. I've been neglecting Steelix on stream. I should probably give the people what they want, but with Tyranitar in the lead, it might need to wait until later, especially given that this lead is, well, it's not very good. I love leading 2 Pokemon weak to ground into Garchomp. Good job, Wolf. I fake out the Garchomp, taking rough skin damage, as Arcanine goes for a head smash, doing tons to Tyranitar. Tyranitar Dragon Dances to end the turn, becoming the fastest Pokemon on the field. I protect Tyranitar and launch a close combat at Arcanine, bringing it down to its Focus Sash. Tyranitar blocks a head smash as Garchomp goes for Dragon Claw, dropping Sneasler to low HP. Breaking the Focus Sash was good, but it's not enough on its own. I switch Sneasler out into Sinistcha, but this time extreme speed is aimed at Tyranitar. I knock off Garchomp, but it survives, and retaliates with Earthquake, knocking out my Tyranitar and my opponent's Arcanine. 3 Pokemon left apiece. I send out Sneasler as my opponent sends out Corviknight. Sneasler knocks out Garchomp with close combat, but immediately goes down to Corviknight Bravebird in exchange. It's 2 against 2 now, with each of us having an unrevealed Pokemon waiting in the wings. But Sinistcha is yet to move. Closing out the turn, it uses Trick Room. And that's because my final Pokemon is none other than
probably the 2 Mega Evolve Pokemon. It is the Steelix of Wolf, the crowd favorite, making an appearance for it. It's the Tyranitar, not the Frostlass. So
okay, so this probably looks bad, right? It's obvious that my Steelix can't do much to this Corviknight, as I can only damage it with the not very effective Heavy Slam. However, I brought Steelix to this battle because I believe it will actually beat Corviknight if it has to, just not very quickly. Unlike other Corviknights that I've played, this one does not have a setup move, no Iron Defense, and no Bulk Up. It also doesn't have any recovery. It also does not have Body Press, the super effective fighting type move. In fact, its only damaging moves are Iron Head and Brave Bird. If I can play this battle to a 1 against 1, there's no way it'll beat my Steelix. We both Mega Evolve, but Tyranitar protects. High Horsepower is blocked, but Machagacha hits the Corviknight and burns. And because of the burn, Sinistcha survives. I actually thought that I would survive regardless, which is why I made that play. but this Corviknight is clearly offensive. With Corviknight burnt, it is very clear it will never beat Steelix, which means this Tyranitar is the last remaining major threat. This is good, but both high horsepower and Machagacha can miss. This game isn't over yet.
Except for potentially dodging a high horsepower and a Machagacha coming out from this Sinistcha. Does not dodge the high horsepower, just takes the big damage there, and the Machagacha also connecting onto Tyranitar, picks up the KO. Tyranitar goes down, Corviknight takes a little bit of damage. Yeah, that was a critical hit, but okay.
It's really not two Pokemon I'm used to watching fight each other in the Pokemon Video Game Championship. The Pokemon is locked in, and Wolf is moving on to the first finals of the Pokemon Champions era.
Wow, an incredible tournament run from Wolf so far, and really well played.
Somehow, I made it to the finals. It was not easy. Not even a little bit. I think this was one of the most Game 3s I've played in a tournament ever, and almost all my wins were down to the wire. But how hard it was to get here doesn't matter. What matters is what I do with the chance now that I've got it. My opponent in the finals has a team that isn't like anything I've seen before. On the one hand, it has Incineroar, Sinistcha, and Floette. But on the other hand, it has Charizard Y, Focus Sash, Sleep Powder Venusaur, and Choice Scarf Garchomp. To beat the Floette, I want Steelix. To beat the Charizard, I want Tyranitar. So I decide to lead both of them together, and figure I'll decide which to Mega based on what I see. But there isn't a Mega in the lead. Instead, it's Venusaur and Garchomp. This is a super volatile position because Venusaur has Sleep Powder. It's only 75% accurate, and a miss would be devastating for my opponent, but if it connects, my Pokemon will be out of commission for at least one turn. And unfortunately, I make a massive mistake on the very first turn of the battle. I switch Tyranitar out into Talonflame, who is my most important Pokemon in this matchup, and immediately take a Dragon Claw, losing most of my health. This was just a terrible play. I was banking on my opponent locking into a ground move as it hits both my Pokemon for super effective damage, but I should have thought through the fact that with Steelix already on the field, I don't have another Dragon resistance that I could switch in. It's hard to overstate how important Talonflame is here, and with its health in jeopardy already, this is truly an awful start. I switch Talonflame back out into Sinistcha, and Mega Evolve Steelix. Dragon Claw hits Sinistcha, and Sleep Powder connects. If Steelix had been able to attack, I would have likely KO'd this Venusaur, but with Sleep Powder connecting, my position is just awful. Garchomp retreats to Incineroar, lowering Steelix's attack, and Earth Power does over half to Steelix. But now I get a stroke of good luck, as Steelix wakes up and lands a heavy slam on Venusaur, who barely survives. Sinistcha twists the dimensions, giving Steelix the speed advantage. The issue is, I still don't know what the last Pokemon is. Probably a Mega Evolution, but it could realistically be either of them. I don't have to wait long to find out. Venusaur switches out into Charizard, as Incineroar fakes out my Steelix. Machagacha does basically nothing, though the chip damage can add up in a matchup like this one. I switch Sinistcha out into Tyranitar, as Incineroar switches out into Garchomp. I protect Steelix, but Charizard actually chooses to not Mega Evolve, staying in its base form and going for a Heat Wave. There's only 2 more turns of Trick Room left. To win, I have to make them count. Charizard switches back into Incineroar, providing another Intimidate. I Heavy Slam the Garchomp and I launch a Rock Slide, and I get the flinch. I'm still behind, but that's a pretty massive deal. If I get a call right on this next turn, I'll be back in the game. I need to predict whether or not Incineroar goes for Fake Out. Fake Out is reasonable if my opponent thinks that I'll stay in with both my Pokemon, but Parting Shot is better if they predict a switch. I think about it. Both my Pokemon have already had their attack stats dropped, Steelix twice. It's obvious I need to get Tyranitar out if I want to overwrite the Sun later, and Sand can actually finish off Venusaur from the range that it's at. I think my most obvious play here is to switch out, and so I launch 2 attacks into Garchomp, hoping to finish it off. But my opponent calls it, and uses Fake Out into Steelix, and Disaster strikes. Knockoff fails to KO Garchomp, and I remove the item, allowing Garchomp to change moves now. Worse, Dragon Claw drops Tyranitar very low. All my Pokemon are damaged now, and I have no more speed control in sight. I switch Tyranitar out into Sinistcha, healing my Steelix, and switch Steelix out into Talonflame. But my opponent doesn't take the bait, and Dragon Claws the Sinistcha switch as they Parting Shot and bring out Charizard once more. My opponent makes the perfect play, switching Garchomp to Incineroar and once again choosing to not Mega Evolve their Charizard. This prevents me from overriding their weather with my own, which would give me tempo to set up a Dragon Dance. Instead, Heat Wave comes out in its base form and knocks out my Talonflame, and I find myself down 3 against 4. I'm forced back into Tyranitar, but things are looking dire. I have one last desperate play. If I can call what Charizard will do on this turn, I may have a chance. Incineroar switches out into Venusaur as I switch Sinistcha to Steelix and Protect. hoping to block a Solar Beam. But it's Weather Ball, and Steelix goes down. With only 2 Pokemon left against all 4 of my opponents and no Dragon Dances already set up, I'm just too slow, and I lose game 1. Okay, that wasn't great, and I need to figure out what exactly went wrong fast. Thinking it over, I think I made 2 major mistakes. The first was letting Talonflame take so much damage. The second was Mega Evolving Steelix before I figured out which Mega my opponent had brought. I could consider changing up my brings, but both Sneasler and Rotom are very risky here. Rotom is great in theory against the Pokemon that my opponent brought, but it becomes dead weight against Calm Mind Floette. And Sneasler just compounds my Garchomp weakness too much. To win this match, I think I've got to do it with the 4 Pokemon that I brought in game 1. So I guess it's no surprise that the leads in game 2 are the exact same as game 1. This time though, the first turn plays out differently. I protect both my Pokemon, getting an extra turn of Sand Chip to break Venusaur's Focus Sash, and confirming that Garchomp is locking itself into Dragon Claw. Now, Garchomp goes for Dragon Claw into Tyranitar as Venusaur goes for another Sleep Powder and connects again. But it hits my Steelix, allowing Tyranitar to Dragon Dance. I think that this Garchomp is going to switch to Incineroar, so I switch Steelix out into Sinistcha, getting some healing, and I go for a Rock Slide, dealing over half to Venusaur and Incineroar. Rock Slide flinches Venusaur, making this turn a huge win for me. I protect both of my Pokemon, stalling out the Fake Out. My opponent switches Venusaur out into Garchomp, and I go for Rock Slide, but it misses Incineroar, a crucial miss. Incineroar can now go for Parting Shot, dropping my Tyranitar to -1 attack and bringing out Charizard, which means the final Pokemon to move is Sinistcha, who goes for a Machigacha, but doesn't burn the Garchomp. Things are okay, but missing the Incineroar really hurts there. I decide that my Tyranitar is too valuable to let go of for now, so I switch it out into Talonflame. And for what feels like the first time all set, I get a call correct. Garchomp goes for Earthquake, and Sinistcha launches a Machigacha, hitting Garchomp, dropping it low, but not getting the burn. Garchomp is forced to switch out into Incineroar, but I Swords Dance. Charizard again doesn't Mega Evolve, staying in its base form and going for a Heat Wave, which is blocked by Sinistcha's Protect. With Swords Dance set up, I am finally in a good spot. Talonflame may have lost Gale Wings and Steelix may be asleep, but I've been chipping down my opponent's Pokemon. I have almost everything where I need them to be. And maybe it's the knowledge that I'm so close to winning that causes me to lose sight of the bigger picture and lock in my move too quickly, realizing immediately after what's about to happen.
+1 rather, and you have the option to potentially swap out that Charizard for Garchomp while you fake out the Talonflame. That still opens up an avenue for you to outspeed this no Gale Wings Talonflame, but the Charizard instead will Mega Evolve.
Still a Mega Evolution on the table for Wolf on the next turn, but the Sun will be active at least for this one to start things off. Incineroar goes for the Fake Out, going to stop this Talonflame in its tracks, and so it's not going to be able to get a turn off for this one, but Charizard goes for Solar Beam. Is that a Tyranitar on the other side?
I think it is.
Charizard lets the Solar Beam rip. That poor Tyranitar is on the receiving end and gets one hit knocked out on the switch in.
I know now the match is probably over, but I still have one tiny hope. My Talonflame has an attack boost, and it's not super easy for them to get rid of it this turn. If I can knock out Charizard on this turn, given that Venusaur and Garchomp are already damaged, I might still have a tiny chance to turn this game around. So I go for the only move that can bring me back into the game, using Brave Bird into Charizard, praying that it won't protect. I hold my breath as I see that it doesn't.
Brave Bird with the Sharp Beak at +1 does actually get so close!
And with that 1 HP survival, there's no longer any hope that I can win. Steelix is sent out, the Pokemon I started this team with, and the last Pokemon standing for me in the tournament. But this is far too tall an order for my Slinky Steel Snake. One more turn and that's it. I'm eliminated in the finals for a final placement of 2nd. It would have been really special to win the first tournament of Pokemon Champions, but even with how the finals went, I can't view this tournament as anything other than a massive success. 2nd place is an excellent finish, and to do it with a Pokemon that had 0 usage beforehand and was not really on anybody's radar, that makes it all the more special. Also, I qualified for Worlds. That was my #1 goal coming into the weekend. Everything on top was just gravy. I don't even like gravy. Why do they say that? This was one of my most brutal tournament runs ever, period. I think if you were to replay this tournament 100 times, I very, very rarely do as well as 2nd, and I probably get eliminated on the first day, well, more than once or twice. While this team was fun to use, piloting it was so challenging. It's not a coincidence that so many of my sets went to 3 games. I think placing second feels even better given this context. These videos take a lot of time and effort to make. The script for this is 45 pages. If you want to support the channel directly, Patreon is the best way to do so. I put tons of content there focused on teaching you competitive Pokemon, going more in depth on many topics than I can on YouTube. And it's because of the support of our Patreon members that we can take extra time polishing these long tournament videos and making them as good as they can be. If you're itching to see me try to win a tournament with another wacky team with tons of tricks built in, I'd recommend checking out the time I entered a tournament with Hisui and Zoroark. It's a fun one, and it's also from this season.